So, ladies and gentlemen, it'll just be a few minutes before we get started. The girls had some car trouble on the way up, so we're just scrambling to get set up. So if you could just bear with us for a few minutes, we'll get started shortly.
That'll be good enough.
Put it on the other side. I will have to repeat it because in order to go online. See if Levi can find one.
We have your information. I need your name, your address, your phone number, email, which RM you belong to, a signature, and whether you're a producer or not. And that gives us the ability to go to government and show them and say, hey, you know, these are the producers that are here, these are the producers that are affected. You know, when it comes down to compensation within the province, anything like that. So anybody that's here, please fill this out. I will start here and we'll work our way around. And yeah, it's really important that you sign up here, please. So thank you.
I gotta find out where the washrooms are in case. go? Okay, good. All right. Well, is this on? Yep. Thank you for coming out today. I know that there's not a person in the room that would like to be in a meeting room in 1st of May on a beautiful day, but the show of people here and the people online certainly indicates an importance of why we're here. So today we're going to have an information session. We're going to hear from the people who handle the issues. We're going to hear from our industry reps that are helping us as producers work through it. And at the end of the day, I hope that we're going to come up with a plan to put together a working group that we can fix some of the challenges that we've faced over the last little while. Because there's a lot of emotion and there's a lot of challenge. People are feeling really tense about this with good reason. Most of us in this room have been through BSE and been through challenges, and so, you know, we respect the fact that people are feeling very, very anxious about this. But I guess what I really ask is that we keep it respectful today. We keep it so that we're informative. We ask our questions, we express our frustrations, but we don't shoot the messengers, and we look to put together a solution and go forward. So with that, I want to make some, I guess, introduce myself first. I'm Dwayne Thompson. I'm from Gallagher Ranch there with my family. I'd like to introduce our Saskatchewan Cattle President, Chad Ross. And if you guys could just give a wave when I introduce you, please. Our,
you have to be louder on mine.
okay, so just closer.
Closer and a little bit louder, I guess.
Our zone director who just set me straight, Levi Hull. Our executive director, Christine Betker, and our policy analyst and person that we can rely on to do many of the other tasks, Marianne Posberg, and Leanne. She covers everything else that happens in SCA. So thank you. They had car trouble on the way up, so that's why we're a little bit delayed in getting started here. On down the list from CFIA, we've got Christine Taylor, Allison Danilek Ross. From the ministry, we've got Dr. Stephanie Smith. She's our provincial vet. Iga Stasiak, Minister of Environment, from the Ministry of Environment. Livestock Services of Saskatchewan, Hugh Garrett, our brand inspector for this area, our lead brand inspector. Sask Crop Insurance, I'm not sure if Janelle's here. Janelle Kunis, thank you, Janelle. And then we've got our SARM Division 4 Director from Kenora, Myron Kopek. So that kind of rounds off the people that are going to be, people that have taken the lead on helping get through the challenge of this tuberculosis problem. We're going to start the session with the presentation by Allison Danilek Ross. She's the CFIA liaison officer, and she's going to give us what to expect from an investigation and just how the TB is affecting cattle, and give us some information on the ins and outs of the disease.
Do you want to just advance slides there, Marianne? Or you want me to sit? Oh, beautiful. You're on it.
All right, can everybody hear me? Yes, good? Okay, thank you. As Dwayne mentioned, my name is Dr. Allison Danilek Ross. I'm the Regional Vet Officer for CFIA in Saskatchewan, and I'm involved in this TB investigation. So today I want to talk to you, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the disease itself and some important factors about it. We're going to talk about testing for bovine tuberculosis, because this is an issue that always comes up, and I want to explain a little bit about the tests that we do. I'm going to talk about the National Bovine TB Eradication Program, what it is and why we do it. And then we're going to talk about what a TB case response looks like. So the disease itself is caused by a bacteria called Mycobacterium bovis. So this is a chronic infectious disease experienced in cattle. And the unique thing about this bacteria is it can persist and live inside macrophages. So these are the body's white blood cells. They're called the natural killer cells. You can see a picture of a big old macrophage in the center of that picture to your right. And so what can happen is sometimes this bacteria can persist inside that cell, and it lives, and the infection remains in the animal. And so it leads kind of to a dormant state where this animal is carrying the disease, but we don't know that it has it. Over time, well, sorry, I'm skipping ahead of you on the slides because I can't see it, but you can see a picture of what's called a granuloma on the bottom right-hand part of the slide. And so what happens is the body realizes that something's wrong with these macrophages. It recognizes there's something abnormal about it because it's got the bacteria inside of it, but it doesn't know exactly what to do with it. So it starts pushing them together, and we end up with these granulomas. And so when we find this lesion at slaughter, this is indicative that this animal might be infected with bovine TB. So the outcome, if a cow is exposed to bovine TB, sometimes the macrophage can kill the bacteria. There's no infection in that animal, and life carries on. Other times, that bacteria persists inside those cells, and we have a latent infection. So this animal is infected, but in the beginning, there's really no way to know. Over time, we will progress to a stage where we're able to find the granulomas. So the body has made enough of these that we can see them grossly at slaughter. And eventually you might get to a point where you see clinical signs of tuberculosis, but quite commonly, no producer has reported any clinical signs. Usually it's just a finding we have at slaughter. So what tests can we do for TB? You guys are probably familiar with the caudal fold test. So this is the test we do by injecting tuberculin into the skin at the base of the tail in the animal. And we'll come back and read the test in 72 hours. If there's a reaction, a lump there, that means the animal is a reactor, and it may possibly be infected with TB. If there's no reaction, then we consider the animal to be negative. This test is done quite a lot for surveillance purposes. You may have seen it done for animals being exported. The test may have been requested or entry to an AI center. You might have seen the test done that way. The other test we commonly do on live animals for an investigation is the Bovine test, or that's short for the gamma interferon assay. And so in this case, we're taking a blood sample from the cow, and we're going to measure the immune response to TB proteins in that sample. And this test can be done obviously on the live animal, and so we like to use it. And this slide is going to help you understand why. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, does the CFIA just test for bovine TB, or does it test for other?
Well, it's kind of a good question, because if we... Okay. When we test... Oh, sorry. Okay, so he's asking about the caudal fold test. I'll go back to it. If it only tests for bovine TB or if other things could react to the test, basically. And the answer is yes. Just because you react to a caudal fold test doesn't mean you're for sure infected with bovine TB. There's other types of mycobacterium. In particular, Mycobacterium avian is one we often see kind of getting in the way, and it'll look like it will be a reactor, but we don't know that it is bovine TB because something else is involved. There are other diseases, possibly Johne's disease, that might mimic a bovine TB reaction as well. So it's not a definitive test. Okay. Anyway, so this is a comparison of the two tests. That dotted blue line, that's the caudal fold test. And you can see it covers kind of a wide range in the disease process of the animal. And so this is a test that we commonly do for surveillance. But you notice at the bottom of the slide, there's a certain period of time in the infection process at the beginning where the caudal fold test can't pick up the diseases there. So that's a space that we miss. If you look at the solid red line, that's the Bovine test. And you'll notice that this test can pick up animals a little bit earlier in the disease process. And so that's why we kind of like to use this test too, because it might catch more animals for us. The dotted green line is the antibody test or the ELISA test. This one's really only valuable really late in the disease process, and we haven't really found it as useful, so it's not as commonly done just for that reason. So here's some important things to know about our diagnostic testing. There is no bovine TB test that is capable with 100% accuracy of distinguishing an exposed uninfected animal, an infected animal but where the infection is dormant, or an infected animal that is progressing towards disease. Each of these animals may test negative. And so that is a real challenge for us that we have to overcome. And it's part of the reason why we employ many different tests to try and find this bacteria, because sometimes it's hard to find. We can confirm bovine TB, but we have to do this by taking samples from the dead animal. So obviously, that's a little bit of a prerequisite to being able to confirm the disease, right? After an animal is euthanized, we'll take samples and send them to our lab. Every sample, every tissue sample will have histopathology and culture done on it. We have a PCR test that stands for polymerase chain reaction. And this test is great. If we see bacteria on the slide, we can use the PCR test to confirm that the bacteria is for sure present. If we don't see bacteria on the slide, then we can't use this test. The PCR test is nice because it's fairly quick. I don't mean overnight, but usually within a couple of weeks we can get a response as to if it's a disease or not. Otherwise, we can culture the samples, and culture is good because it'll tell us what genotype and strain of the bacteria that we have in that sample. The concern about culture is it takes a long time to grow. So it can take up to 16 weeks before we get a confirmatory response from the lab if the disease is there or not. So the eradication program, what is it and why do we have it? So the goal of the program is to detect and eradicate bovine TB. We want to eradicate it from people. It's a human health concern. It is zoonotic. People can catch it. We want to eradicate it from our livestock. And we also want to eradicate it from wildlife as well, because they can certainly be involved in transmitting the disease to both livestock and potentially people. So one of the main drivers for wanting to eradicate this disease is public health concerns. If you go back a century, this disease was actually common in people. There would be signs up to cover your nose when you sneeze to prevent transmitting the flu and prevent transmitting TB. This is a chronic debilitating disease, and as I've mentioned, it can be hard to diagnose and a little bit hard to treat. We do have better antibiotics now than we did back in the 1920s, but the problem we're seeing now is resistance, okay? We've largely eliminated bovine TB from people. None of us walk around being worried about it or have any knowledge to be worried about it. There's people with an occupational risk, those that work in a slaughter plant, potentially producers that have infected cattle, and there's some remote reserves that they still find this problem. Animal health. So this is a picture of a bovine TB infected cow. They're obviously poor doers, not really great members of your herd. And there's been reviews done to show the economic benefit of not having this disease in your herd. That should be fairly apparent. And one of the biggest points is trade. Almost every export certificate I've seen has required us to be bovine TB free. And trade is a big part of what we do in this country. We produce way more meat than we can consume here. And so having these market access is absolutely critical to us. So that ends up being a big part of why we do what we do. So milestones of bovine TB. If you go back to 1923, at this point we decided we wanted to eradicate it from our cattle. And the prevalence in our cattle herd at that time was 5%. So 5% of the cattle in Canada on that day had bovine TB. That was the year that we started trying to eradicate It was 1923. So we would go on farm, test cattle, and remove them. All the reactors were removed. You can see by 1961, we had the rate down to 0.1%. So that's a really significant drop we had in getting rid of TB in cattle. If you go to 1970, the TB eradication criteria were included in the Health of Animals regulations. And then you go to 1978, and it was at this point in time, producers came to us and said, we don't really want you coming on our farms anymore to test these cattle. Is there another way that we could do surveillance for TB? And through 78 to 84, we did a review of our program, and we started shifting to doing surveillance for TB at slaughter. The consequences of that are, if we find an animal at slaughter that has a TB lesion, we will confirm it's TB, but we have to go back to the herd of origin. We have to do an epidemiological investigation to find that herd. And we're going to depopulate an infected herd. If you go to 1997, the US removed the requirement for Canadian cattle to be tested for TB before export. And so that was a really big win for us. You can see through 2003 to 2019, this is when we were dealing with TB in the Riding Mountain area in Manitoba. And this situation was a little bit difficult because there were many cattle farms infected, and it was the elk that was transmitting the disease between the farms. The province of Manitoba did a lot of work to eradicate TB from wildlife. Not going to talk too much more about wildlife because Ika wants to talk to you about that too. But they did a lot of work to eradicate TB. The last elk we found positive for TB in Manitoba was in 2014. So they did an excellent job of eradicating TB in that area and really should be commended for it. So obviously there's been significant government and industry investment in this program since it began in 1923. Many cattle were destroyed, many compensation dollars were paid. But at the end, we had a lot of success, right? So we've gotten the prevalence of bovine TB in our national herd from 5% in 1923 to 100 years later, less than 0.001%. So that's really awesome. We've pretty much eliminated zoonotic bovine TB. It's not a disease people catch anymore or even think about catching. We've eliminated the reservoir in Riding Mountain National Park, which is a really big win. And so the economic benefits for us are quite substantial, right? It gives us all our trading market access. So when you put all the elements together, the fact that we do surveillance, which is done primarily at slaughter, when we have a suspect case, we investigate. When we confirm a case, we respond to eradicate the disease. And we also do things to manage any reservoir of wildlife that might have it. If you put all these things together, we're allowed to say we're free of bovine TB. And that gives us the access we want in our international markets. So our surveillance is still done primarily at slaughter. This is where we find the lesions and we investigate from there. There is other surveillance done. There is testing done, again, for export reasons, maybe for entry to an AI center. But surveillance is primarily where we find these lesions. And the backbone of that is traceability. So when I find a lesion at slaughter, I have to be able to trace it back to the farm of origin. Because if I can't do that, we've got even bigger problems. This is just an article that was done back in 2016. And on an individual animal basis, the sensitivity for TB is low, but it just goes on to illustrate that due to the large volume of cattle that are inspected per year in Canada, the probability of finding this disease, if it's present, is very, very high. And so that's really good news, and that allows us to continue doing what we do. This little graph shows you all the cases of TB in Canada. Goes back to the 70s, right? So you can see how the case numbers have dropped off. So cases have becoming increasingly rare and sporadic. People in Saskatchewan don't believe me when I say that, but here you go. So I don't expect you to read all these little words, right? But these are all the strains of TB we found in Canada from 1923 or 1983 till today. These are the strains that we found in Riding Mountain National Park. Those are the strains that we found in Wood Buffalo National Park. At the bottom, you can see the little green guy. That's the strain we found in Alberta in 2016. The blue one is the strain we found in BC in 2018. And the red one is the strain we found in Saskatchewan in 2023. So none of them are related. And if we kind of go in the far area on the right there and expand it, that's the strain we found in Saskatchewan in 2024. So the important thing to know is this strain has never been found in Canada before. It is not related to the strain we found in 2023. This strain has also not been seen in the US. It is not in their genome database either. So the origin of this strain is unknown.
We got a question. Hold on. Hold that. Hold it.
You have to wait for the microphone.
Have you ever found the origin of a strain?
Not really.
No.
Usually we don't. Okay.
Just wondering.
And I don't know if that's good or bad, right? There are risks. Obviously, wildlife is one of them, and we'll talk about that. But we haven't been able to implicate that in anything except for Riding Mountain and Wood Buffalo National Park. Imports are a concern as well. There is TB in the States. You'll notice I said that this strain has never been in the US, so is that where it came from? We're going to do a lot of work with an infected producer. Have you bought anything from the US? That's an important question. But we're going to kind of talk about that, how we do an investigation to try and figure out where it came from. Go ahead. Well, with the microphone.
Does the United States do the same extent of testing that Canada does? And if not, why is it so important that Canada does those tests and the US doesn't?
Yeah, no, the United States does the same thing. And I'll talk about, there's a lot of countries that do. We all follow the World Organization for Animal Health and their stamping out policy. So it's really important that we follow that policy. The United States actually goes harder than we do. If I have an infected herd, I'm going to test everything that's 6 months and older, and they start at 3 months. So
When it comes to strains, is it, we try to find what strain it is or what strain it's close to? Because I've heard in the past that it's, strains could be like the Brazilian strain, or they could be from Mexican strain, or anything like that.
So you got to be a little bit careful. So this strain we haven't seen before. There's others kind of near it, but it's not near anything else we found in our other investigations, right? This one is not related to anything else that we've done. All of these strains have ancestors, just like I do, you do, right? There was a strain found in Mexico in 1997, and this guy was popular. He's got a lot of progeny living today, and they spread throughout North America. So quite commonly, they've traced back to him as an ancestor. Doesn't mean that they got the disease from Mexico. It's just an ancestor. These bacteria, they like to change their genes. They like to move. They like to do stuff, right? So that Mexican guy was real popular.
I think that's absolutely crucial because, when it comes down to, the CFIA website, sometimes it'll state like a Mexican strain or a Brazilian strain. And then, especially in this room, it's like, well, how did that make its way here? So for producers to understand that,
Yeah,
I think
so
would be really good
it's
this
an
afternoon.
ancestor, right? So I got ancestors. Some of my family's from Norway. Never been to Norway. Love to go, right? There's people there I'm probably related to. I have no idea who they are, though, right? So same thing.
So with the current available testing that you have, why are we eradicating entire herds instead of just the reactors? Is the testing not good enough to pick up enough of the infected animals?
So that's kind of goes back to what I said. There's no test that can pick up 100% of them. It's not possible for me to find all the infected animals in a herd. And so that's why we do what we do. It's also part of the stamping out policy for us to do that and to get back to a TB-free status as fast as we can. If we left animals, we would not be able to claim TB freedom. Okay? Everybody good? Okay. So some of your questions are going to answer again here in this slide, but there's some important things to remember about TB. Number one, it can be transmitted through a variety of routes. The biggest place animals catch the disease is over the winter feeding trough, with all the snotty nose hanging over it for long periods of time. However, that's not the only way, and one big thing to remember is it can persist in the environment, particularly in big piles of poo. You know, it can last quite a long period of time there. That gets important towards the end of investigation when we do cleaning, and I'll bring that up again. The ability for this infection to remain in a dormant state. So it can live inside this animal for a long period of time, and I'm talking years, and I'm not going to be able to know it's there. And the last thing is the inability of our current tests to be able to 100% diagnose every animal with TB. We just don't have that ability. This bacteria is very sneaky, he's very hidden, and he's very hard to find. So I'm going to talk about a case response and what it looks like. We'll start off at the beginning. We're going to find a lesion at slaughter, and I'm going to have to trace that animal back to its herd of origin. So this is the lifeline investigation. And then once we get to the herd of origin, we're going to have to figure out, is that the only place it was before it went to slaughter? Or did it stop other places along the way? And those are places we have to investigate. So that's what this slide is trying to show. You know, if an animal went directly from the birth farm to the slaughter plant, we can 100% say that the birth farm is where it picked up the disease. I'll call that farm infected. Quite often, though, they went through, they might have been sold and been in other breeding farms. It might have been in backgrounding lots. It might have been in feedlots. It might have been in all of the above. And so that means we have to do an investigation to figure out where the disease may have come from. So once I confirm the birth farm, I'm going to confirm that the disease is present in that herd, okay? So the first thing I'm going to do is place movement controls on it. We're going to talk more about that. I'm going to test that herd, and I'm going to explain to you why. We'll talk about depopulation and cleaning and disinfection, and we'll talk about restocking the herd because I know that's where you're going to want to get to, okay? So movement controls, this is basically a quarantine, and you're not allowed to move animals off without the permission of CFIA. Where might you want to move an animal to? We might want to take it to slaughter. We might want to take it to a diagnostic lab for testing, like PDS. But wherever we permit an animal to be moved, it must remain isolated from other susceptible livestock. And so that means no commingling, no fence line contact. And it's got to remain so it wouldn't infect anybody else. The purpose of this is to limit the spread of disease. So you're under quarantine and you need a veterinarian. Now what the heck do you do? Really would be preferable to do any treatments on the farm of origin if possible. Your veterinarian's normal practices of coming to the farm, wearing coveralls, boots, gloves, and they would disinfect all their tools used after the procedure is done, clean their boots and spray off their tires as they leave your farm. That's suitable for bovine TB. In some situations, you're not going to be able to do it on farm, obviously, right? And so that's where we need to talk about how you're going to move that animal to a vet clinic and get it back home. So we can give you a license to do that. It really is preferable if you happen to find yourself under quarantine to have a conversation in advance with your veterinarian so you guys can set everything up and everybody knows what has to be done and what they're responsible for, so when the need arises, you can just spring into action, right? You can contact also your local district office, and they can help you put your plan together too, and help the veterinarian as well. So if you're the producer and you need to take this cow to the clinic, you're going to need to use a trailer that's cleaned and disinfected before you go. You're going to want to use minimal bedding on the trailer. And the trailer, after you bring it home, is going to need to be cleaned and disinfected before you use it again. Alternatively, if you're just under quarantine while we're testing you, say, you could wait until lab results are back, and if we tell you you're negative, then, carry on as you are. If any manure bedding falls off the trailer at the vet clinic, it's really important that we pick that stuff up and dispose of it and not leave it there for the next client's cow to walk through it, because that's a potential source of transmission. So that's a little bit more than maybe the vet clinic normally does when the cow arrives, but we have to pay attention to all areas that these cattle were contacted. The producer is going to have to keep some information. So we're going to want to know the identification of the animal, the tags, type of animal it is. We're going to want to know the date you moved to and from the clinic. We're going to want to know why you moved it there. We're going to want to know the vet clinic and the vet that did the treatment. And we're going to want to know the truck trailer information. So you're going to have to put this information together and just send it to us. On the vet clinic side, we're going to have to make absolutely sure that there's no other susceptible species present that could contact this animal while they're at the clinic. And they're going to have to do full cleaning and disinfection of all the facilities that were used to handle that animal and all the tools that were used after the animal leaves.
What is the estimated timeline of something like this? If CFIA phoned me and said, hey, you've bought an animal from such and such an operation, we are coming to do a PIQ, we want to go through your entire operation. What does that look like for a producer?
Okay, well, you're kind of skipping ahead of me a little bit in this.
Okay, answer it in a minute if you would.
Yeah,
Okay.
I do want to just say, though, because it kind of leads me to something about this, but, and it gets to the last point in this slide. We're going to ask the vet to do a biosecurity SOP, just to write out everything they're going to do. And it's just a way for everybody to make sure they all know their responsibilities in advance. You're probably going to need emergency treatment in the middle of the night. And when you phone me to get a license, I'm not going to answer the telephone, right? We get that. And so that's why we'd like you to set this up in advance. So if you need to do it in the middle of the night, you can go ahead. You can phone me in the morning to say, this is what I did, and we can issue the license for it. Okay, but I'm going to talk to you about all that other stuff as we get through this here. Okay, so the next thing, why should I test a herd that has been declared infected? So it may be that your animal went straight from the birth farm to the slaughter plant. I'm going to say it's infected. I'm going to declare your herd infected. I'm going to say you have the disease. I'm going to come test the herd anyways. And that's going to be a bit of a hassle for you. Why am I going to do that? Number one, we got to figure out the level of exposure risk in that herd. So there's going to be perhaps other species beside cattle on your farm. Do you got goats? Do you got sheep? Do you got horses? Do you got dogs and cats? Do you got whatever, right? We want to know the level of infection, and we want to know where the infection was found on your farm. There's a tracing period. So TB is in the animals for a long period of time before we know it's there. Our estimate is usually 5 years. So you've had that disease usually for 5 years before we know it's there. So our tracing period to start out is 5 years. So that means I'm going to want to know every animal you've purchased and every animal you've sold in the past 5 years. The animals you've purchased, they may have brought the disease to your farm, and I'm going to want to know if this other herd is actually the source, because we're going to have to do an investigation there. And I want to know everywhere animals went to, because they might have spread the disease to other places, right? If your herd is very heavily infected, maybe you've had it longer than 5 years, we might need to extend that period. We want to assess exposure risk for other herds that are linked to your herd. And so this gets important when you start looking at animals you've purchased. We'll use this for an example. If you have an animal on your farm, it's a bull you bought, and he's positive. Did he catch it on your farm, or did he bring it from the farm you bought him from? We need to know that. He's a high-risk situation because there's a little bit chance that he might have brought it from the farm of origin. So we're going to go test that herd on a high-risk basis. If you've purchased this other bull and he's negative, it's probably unlikely that he brought it from the farm of origin. We're still going to go test that herd as a measure of confidence, but it's probably unlikely, so he would be tested on more of a low-risk basis. And so this is where risk level comes into play and might alter our activities on different farms compared to each other. We're going to want to look at destruction and disposal options. Usually we're going to take these animals to slaughter. Quite commonly that's what we do. Sometimes we might need to send individuals to a diagnostic lab like PDS. Sometimes we might need to bury things on farm. So we want to know what we're dealing with in terms of what your operation looks like and where we found the disease and what makes sense for disposal of this animal. And the last part is targeting postmortem inspection. So quite commonly when we have reactors, actually always when we have reactors, we're going to test your herd. We're going to say that these reactors are more likely to be infected with disease because they're reacting positive to a test, right? So we're going to send these guys for enhanced postmortem. And that means we're going to slaughter them and we're going to collect a lot of tissues from them. And we're going to send them to the lab whether we see a lesion or not, because they might have the bacteria and they might not have a granulomatous lesion yet. We might not be able to see the infection. And so you have to remember this is a zoonotic disease. People can catch it. So number one, we want to make sure we have all the supplies and people there to collect all these tissues because it's quite an intensive process. Secondly, we want to make sure that everyone's wearing personal protective equipment when these animals are going down the line to protect their own personal safety as well. Okay. Thank you. Depopulation. So I've confirmed your herd is infected, and that means I'm going to depopulate the herd. And so this approach is analogous to the World Organization for Animal Health stamping out policy. This is what we have to do to stamp out the disease, eradicate it, and we can move back to a TB-free status. Canada is a country. We share our information with our trading partners, and when we have the disease, we share that with them and we show our response to it, and they expect us to follow this stamping out policy. Other animals we might depopulate are animals that you've sold to other herds. We will go and depopulate those as well because they've been exposed on an infected premises. We might be testing other herds for different reasons as well, and we'll talk about that. But animals might be destroyed for those reasons too. Again, quite commonly we do this at abattoirs. Sometimes we might do individuals at a diagnostic lab, or sometimes we have to do some on farm as well. And anytime we do that, we have to make sure we comply with municipal and provincial requirements for disposal. Compensation, we do pay compensation for all animals and things ordered destroyed. And by thing, I might mean something like feed. And this is quite commonly done more, say, in a response to avian influenza in a poultry barn. Usually there's feed in there when the disease is diagnosed. The feed has been exposed to the virus. It's considered contaminated, so I might order it destroyed. This is less common with something like bovine TB, but it is possible that something like that could be ordered destroyed. If you go to this website, you can find out more information about compensation. Compensation does tend to be very unique and personal to each producer, so it's not something I'm really going to talk about more in a public forum like this. Cleaning and disinfection. So after we've depopulated your herd, we're going to clean and disinfect it. So a CFIA staff member will come out to your farm, and we're going to want to go through everywhere that the animals have been kept. So all of the things you've used to handle your animals, your chutes, your pens, your feeding troughs, your water bowls. We're going to look at all these areas and come up with a plan to make sure we get rid of this disease, because as I mentioned, it can be out there in the environment and infect animals again. So we'll make sure that it can be done in a proper manner to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So after, yeah, go. Oh.
Hold on, Jackie, sorry. But you can't yell loud enough.
In regards to the cleaning, you say you come out and do all that. At what, who does the work and at whose cost is that?
Cleaning and disinfection is not something I can pay compensation for. My regulations do not allow it. So that cost is borne on the producer, and the work is borne on the producer as well. I do encourage you to work with your industry associations for other forms of support, but it is not something that I can pay for.
Is there anything besides cleaning and disposal like that gets rid of the strain? That, you know, like does sunlight get rid of it over time, or because there's a couple options, right? You can do cleaning and disposal, do all the work there, or you can leave your place.
I'm just going to talk about that on the next slide. You're getting ahead of me again, Levi. Okay, so we're going to pretend that you did clean and disinfect everything, and that is super. After that, there's a 45-day vacancy period, and this period is just out of a measure of caution to make sure that we have eradicated the bacteria from your farm. Each day in this period must have 3 hours of sunlight, less than 2 millimeters of rain, and must reach 12 degrees Celsius. Clearly in Saskatchewan, you have to do a lot of these in the spring, summer, early fall months, right? The days do not have to be consecutive, but they must total 45. Let's pretend you did not clean and disinfect. What happens? You're going to enter a 2-year fallow period where you cannot restock for that period until it has expired. Okay?
So, now that we know that, you know, conversations have been had about, you know, water sources being cleaned, dugouts, you know, water bowls. Everyone in this room is very familiar with the lay of the land, and we live in Slough City. And conversations have been had of you know, removing dirt around those areas, you know, cow tracks, stuff like that. This could be quite expensive for these producers, removing, you know, 3 to 5 inches of soil around an area, because that's traditionally what, you know, cow tracks are. I'm just getting to the point of it gets real expensive really quick for somebody that didn't ask for this.
Yeah, I recognize that, and no producer has asked for this, and frankly, it's hard to know how you got it too, so that makes it difficult to prevent. I understand that, but I cannot pay for it. My regulations do not allow it, and they won't let me.
So do I need to help change regulation?
You can talk to us after that about
Okay.
it, and you can work with your industry groups, but as of this point right now, I am unable to do that. Okay?
So what do you do with the contaminated dirt then?
So you dispose of it. We might make you bury it. What are we gonna? How often do we get rid of dirt? You're not gonna dig up your whole pasture. That is not something we usually do. Individual little drops of poo here and there aren't a concern, but it's where the animals may have congregated. So your winter feeding areas, probably those things you'd have to dig up the top couple inches of dirt and bury it. There have been situations where animals have, and this was particularly around a premises that was small, they tended to congregate around this dugout area, so we asked them to do that as well. But yeah, we'd have to dispose of it, and quite often it's buried somewhere.
When you say bury it, you have to.
We've got internet, guys, so I just want to do this.
When you say bury it, do you have to line that area of soil somewhere to create a barrier, because you're just putting it back in the dirt again?
Yeah, no, we don't make you do that, but we're gonna want you to put it under the ground a certain distance. Another.
My understanding is that if I dig a hole to dispose of animals, I don't get paid. But if I hire somebody to do it, it's covered by CFIA.
That actually
Can we not
changed.
change the regulations on
That
cleanup?
actually did change. That regulation has changed. When did it change? 6 months ago? I'm gonna guess a little bit. It was more recent. So you get the good prize here, I guess. But we can pay the producer for doing his own work now.
Just a slide or two back there when said you come out and inspect the facilities. Now, it isn't 100% sure on testing the animals. How do you test the facilities? And I mean, who determines what you're going to clean and how you're going to clean it? That's, I mean, the two don't jive.
It's not 100% in testing an animal because that bacteria can hide inside of the cell, right? It can hide inside that animal. When we come out and inspect, we're going to look in places where it's most likely to be. And as I mentioned before, the winter feeding trough, that's the primary place this disease is transmitted. And so we have trained people to come out to look at all areas, and we're going to look at places that mostly cattle congregated closely, because that's generally where the disease is transmitted. And we have been very successful in cleaning places and them not having it again.
Yeah, with our high numbers of elk population becoming an issue, and as they determined a cow in my herd was bovine, or TB, how they determine whether I brought it in or if the elk brought it in?
We're going to talk about that some more at the end of my slide, and Iga's going to talk about it too, but that is something we'll talk about.
So you're indicating that it's on the feeding patches or the bedding patches. So when you go to clean those, what's the recommendations on that?
So a cleaning process, there's a dry cleaning process. So say in a feeding trough, you're going to get rid of everything that's in it that you can scoop out, right? There's a wet process where you use soap and water to clean it out. And then there's a disinfectant process where you put on a disinfectant. Things like Prevail work on TB. People can also do things like blowtorch. That works as well. Some guys have whitewash too.
Like I'm talking a big, you've got a corral that your cows have been in. So you've had bedding, you've been putting bedding down for all winter. So every spring you clean that corral out of all that manure. So where, like, you can't burn that. Like, where does that manure, are we composting it? Are we, like, what happens to the manure in our corrals and our bedding
Different
areas?
options. There's different options. We may look at burying it in some places. There's some feedlots that have composted it. And you could take that and spread it over a field that's not used for cattle field. Sunlight will kill it over a summer. But again, each premise will be a little bit different, so we'd have to come out and evaluate.
Why isn't there a protocol that every situation is handled the same so everybody knows exactly what's going on?
Well, we could do that, but that's worse.
Why is that worse?
Because I'm going to have to do everybody the same. So that means everybody's under quarantine until culture results come back. Everybody has to, it'd be a lot more waiting, right? If we evaluate on a high-risk, low-risk basis, you're a more low-risk, that allows people to do things. And we run into situations, people that don't have feed. I got a group of feeders here, they're low risk. Can I move them? Different things like that. It's allowed us a lot more flexibility, which is what gives us the opportunity to let producers continue to do some things as much as we can find the options there. And so that's been really valuable to be able to do.
But correct me if I'm wrong, you're held into quarantine until culture results come back, and that could be 30 to 90, well, probably 90 days.
There's some situations where we've released based on histopathology on a more low-risk situation. Good. Okay, I'm almost done. So after the vacancy period has expired, you may restock. We are going to come back and test the animals just to confirm the eradication of the disease. We'll come back 6 months after you've bought your first animals and test them, and then we'll come back a year after that to test what you have. Okay, I'm going to talk about other disease investigation measures. We're going to talk about trace in and trace out herds a bit more, contact premises, proximity premises, and we're going to talk about wildlife a little bit about that. So what is tracing? I kind of reviewed this for you before, but you're an infected premises. I'm going to want you to find out every place you've bought animals from in the past 5 years. And this is critically important because you may not be the first one that had this disease. You may have purchased it from somebody accidentally, and we need to make sure that there's nobody else that's out there that's a source of infection. And we're going to want to know everywhere you've sold animals for the past 5 years to make sure you haven't spread the disease to another farm. In a perfect world, you're going to put a CFIA tag in your animal, and you're going to sell it, and the new owner that buys the cow is going to put the new ownership information on the tag in the system, It might stay on farm, or he might sell it again, and that new owner is also very nice and puts the new ownership information on the tag, till eventually we get to slaughter and the tag is retired. This is a lot of great information for me. It's what I need to know. That's usually what I get, right? And so we do a lot of work to trace where all these animals have been from the starting point to the last point, but it takes us a bit of time because we have to do it by interviewing people and tracing animals back, and this is part of the reason why it takes us so long to do a TB investigation. Sometimes I only have this. I know where the animal came from, and I don't know where it went after that, so we have to try and find that out. Every once in a while, this is what we have. We know we have a black cow with a disease, and we have no idea where it came from. That has happened. So we got to use all the other ways to find them, right? We got to talk to brand inspectors. Sometimes cows have brands, as you know, and the brand inspector can help us trace back to other premises that cow has been on. Other tattoos, metal tags, farm tags, we can use those. And sometimes just the breed, color, and weight. We've actually had to phone auction marts to find out where the red calf went. Takes us a while to figure out which red calf we're looking for, right? So these things take us a lot of time to do, and it's part of the reason why an investigation takes a long time. Complicating factors. So sometimes animals are mixed with other herds at wintertime. Sometimes this happens at summer, particularly at things like community pasture. Some guys will share bulls. And there's no official record of this, so we have to do it by interviewing people and getting names of people. And the unfortunate part about all this is all these guys will be implicated in the response because they've been exposed. But sometimes it takes us a little bit of time to find you, right? Because we have to do it the old-fashioned way. Just to give you an idea of what tracing has looked like in the past, this is the 2016 investigation. We had 2,700 animals to trace. That led us to about 160 herds on a trace-in basis, about 56,000 animals to screen. And on a trace-out basis, that led us to 200 herds and 30 buyers, so these are cattle buyers. From there, we have to figure out where the animals had went, and about 60,000 animals to test. So this is quite significant, right? 2023, a much smaller herd. We had 471 animals to trace. That herd is fairly closed. They'd only bought 2 bulls in the past 5 years and 1 heifer that sort of accidentally joined the herd. So we had 3 trace-in herds to investigate. And a trace-out perspective led us to 5 breeding herds and a bunch of feedlots to find animals that had left. There was also 1 contact herd. So this is a fellow that grazed his animals adjacent to the infected premise for summer pasture for 5 years. So we had to test that herd as well. For a 2024 investigation so far, I know of 4,300 animals to trace. I know that I have at least 533 animals that were bought from, that many farms. 18 farms and 6 auctions, so I need to trace the herd of origin from those auctions. And on a trace-out basis, we're still working on it, right? This premise did sell a lot of replacement breeding heifers, so I do anticipate a number of breeding herds to be implicated in the response. Contact herds. So these are like the herd I referred to in Manitoba. He grazed summer pasture adjacent to the infected premise, so it might be contact across a fence line, it might be contact at a community pasture, stuff like that. So we are going to trace these herds. We're going to find the herds, and we are going to test them on a risk basis after we categorize it. And a proximity investigation. So these are herds within we could use a 5-kilometer radius. They might have been infected perhaps by wildlife or perhaps other types of engagement with neighbors and stuff like that. So we're going to find them and test them just as a measure of confidence too. So wildlife, this disease, if a cattle herd has had it, it could potentially have come from wildlife, like happened in Riding Mountain, or an infected herd could spill the disease back into the wildlife. And so we want to try and figure out if that has happened. There's been situations where wildlife have been implicated in transmission of disease. You can see there's a situation of white-tailed deer in the US. Was it brush-tailed possum in New Zealand and the European badger in the UK of Ireland. So these species have been implicated in transmission of disease. In Canada, we've had obviously the situation with elk in Riding Mountain National Park, and also with bison around Wood Buffalo National Park. Some wildlife species are capable of becoming reservoirs of disease. Most specifically, we have cervids. Bison and feral swine could be implicated in that. There are other species you can see listed like foxes, coyotes, raccoons. They could potentially catch the disease, but they're unlikely to be a risk of transmission to other species. So in terms of wildlife, whenever we have an infected herd, we're going to take interest in the wildlife in that area. And we're going to collaborate with our provincial wildlife authorities to come up with a plan to do surveillance on the wildlife in that area to try and figure out perhaps they may be implicated. They may have picked it up from the cattle herd and so on. I've put this at the end of the presentation, not because it's of any importance as last or because it's the most likely place. It's just the place it ended up. So don't point fingers at the wildlife. If you want to keep informed, you can go to our website and you'll find information that's up to date on what's been happening in the investigation. It does take us time to go through in the investigation, so you got to expect it to be, it'll take us a little while to get through it all, but we'll put updates as we go along. And that's the end of my presentation. I might need to answer your question too. Go ahead.
Allison, just a question. With respect to the traceability of things, has there been any changes made to the requirements of auction markets and order buyers and that kind of stuff to be making sure that when an animal's coming through their system that it's getting at least so that you have some traceability of some form that's happening?
I love your idea. That proposal was put forward for the regulations. We've kind of been in a place of everything has stalled, I guess is the right word. We've been in the caretaker convention where not much has happened in terms of regulations and stuff because we've been through an election period and so on. So now that we've had an election, obviously we have a new government. I do expect that to move forward, but it's in the works, I guess is the answer.
It's just interesting after your presentation. I'm a counselor for an RM, and I've been fighting the Environment Department and the Sask government over our elk population. And basically, it's interesting how all of a sudden we're getting more cases, and it seems like it's very highly populated with elk. And I mean, I've had reports where the elk have been feeding with the cattle, eating corn, stalk corn, grazing, bedding, and all that. You know, like basically there's got to be some correlation with our wildlife population with this outbreak.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to tell you two things. One is we look for it. We try and figure out if there is a correlation. Number two, I'm going to let Iga talk about that more. Okay?
When it comes down to compensation, what does that look like? When it comes down to individual operations? You said that, you know, it's different from operation to operation, and I guess I'm a little bit more privy to this. So there is a cap, and that cap hasn't been changed in a decade, and we need that regulation to be a lot more fluid. And for the first time in the history of this, we've seen cattle prices, you know, skyrocket very quickly, and we've superseded the legislation as far as I'm concerned. So, what do? What does that look like, and how do we change that?
There is a cap. There's a maximum per animal per species listed in the regulations. I am bound by the regulations, and I am unable to go past our regulation. In terms of movement of that, I know Lee will talk about that a little bit more. It's not something that I am able to change, but she will talk about that if that's good for you.
What do those look like? What do those numbers look like, I guess? Like
Do you want to know what the maximums are now? Okay, sorry. So the maximum for a commercial cow is $4,500, and the maximum for a registered cow is $10,000.
So where are you in your whole scenario? Like how far along are you in testing and tracing and registration?
We are right at the very beginning. Okay. A typical TB investigation takes us about 2 years to get through everything. So this one just started. We basically just finished depopulating the infected herd, so we're moving on to next steps there. We've got some trace-in herds that we've identified. Some trace-in herds of importance because the trace-in animal was positive, so we're going at those obviously on a more of a high-risk basis. We're just starting to find the trace-out animals too. So we're not anywhere near the end.
So from start to finish, my question earlier,
Yep.
if you could answer that, please.
Yeah, so what does it look like for time? So we contact you, perhaps you're implicated in the investigation or what have you. We're going to put movement controls on you. Have you bought animals? Do you still have the animal? I mean, there's lots of different situations here, right? Probability is we're going to want to come and test your herd. There's certain times we can't do that. So we cannot do that a month before you start calving, and we have to wait till a month after calving to test. So obviously there's a whole calving period that we get stalled. Summer pasture, if you're at summer pasture when I give you a call, we're probably going to have to wait till you bring the animals home. So these kinds of things can delay when we start the test. But we will test the animals. We will find reactors, which we will send for enhanced postmortem. We have to line up a facility, a slaughter plant to do that. We'll collect tissues and send them to our lab. Histopathology, we'll get those results back in 2 weeks. And further action, depending on what happens from there, might depend on if you're a low-risk herd or a high-risk herd, et cetera. And as I mentioned before, culture results can take a while. They can take up to 16 weeks.
Hi. If we're testing the CT test and we do get reactors and they're reacting to a different strain of something else, but we're looking for TB, why are we looking for these other things if they're just another thing to react and make something more difficult than what it already is?
Well, we're not necessarily looking for other things, but other things interfere with our test, right? So we're looking for bovine TB. This test is not 100%, number one. Number two, other things interfere with it, right? So we've done a caudal fold test on your herd, and we get animals with a reaction. They might have bovine TB, they might not. And so that's why we need to go to things like enhanced postmortem to figure out if it's actually there or not. I'm not sure if I'm fully understanding your question or if that answers it.
For instance, let's say there's 47 reactors in my herd.
Yep.
And you send them all for postmortems and they
Yep.
all come back negative with lesions and probably negative with TB. Why is there not a test that just picks up the TD? Why are you taking all these other bird flu and all these other tests into consideration and taking animals that don't have TB?
Because the only live animal tests I have are the caudal fold test and the bovigam test, and these other things can look like a reactor. There's no way for me to tell for sure on a live animal.
Use the same test from 1920 as well? Like, we started in 1920 doing this. Are we using the same testing procedures as in 1920?
Well, I wouldn't think so. I mean, our tests have gotten better, and things like the ELISA test, I mentioned that one too. That one hasn't been very reliable for us. I know they're doing research on that. But TB is a really difficult disease because of how it persists in the body, and it is hard for us to find.
You want a question?
Is there any further investigation into what the reactors would be reacting to within that test, that CFT test?
Not from our lab, no. We're interested if you have bovine TB, if you have a reportable disease, that's our mandate. Sometimes the lab can tell us, and I'll see reports, this looks like this, or this looks like that, but after that point, our investigation has ended if they turn out negative.
You don't...
I'm not going to tell you other things that are in your herd, no.
You don't you wouldn't consider sending the samples to other labs to investigate further?
We can't do that because of the level of lab. These are high-level labs, and we can't ship samples out from them because of the disease risk inside the lab. There's restrictions in place on that.
Jackie?
So if you had the reactors and they've gone through a codifold and then they've gone through the histology and they all come up as negative, do those still have to go for culture?
We culture everything, yep.
Okay, and so sending in a negative sample for culture, have you ever had a positive TB come from that?
Yep.
Like, what are the odds? Like, over the years that you've been?
I don't know if I could even tell you that, but I know in the last investigation we did have that. And it's not a surprise because we can't always see this bacteria grossly, right? So. Oh, good. You're gonna be here a while.
We have an online question from Larry. Why has compensation not been increased? It has been the same since 2016. Is a cow-calf pair considered two animals?
Yeah, we do pay compensation for every animal, and we will look at values of pairs that are sold in markets and things like that. In terms of the value of the regulations, that is not something I can comment on when they do it or why they do it. That is decided obviously at the minister level. So,
to piggyback on that, I do have a very serious issue with what we've dealt with in this last case and the timeliness of this case. We have cows that were very heavy in calf in utero, and we did not value those calves at all. And I think, oh, sorry. I got learned my own lesson. So I think we have to take into value those calves that were, very, very close to being born and adding a value to that as well. And especially when it comes down to the compensation schedule and conversation.
The only thing I'm going to say, I'm going to say two things. One is I'm not going to talk about specific situations of compensation here. Number two, we do have a team that looks at it and looks at comparable sales on the marketplace, but that's all I can really say.
How fast do producers get compensation when they're trying to, or tying up their inventory with a quarantine?
So compensation we can do, and we like to do advance payments, so give you a portion of your compensation. It doesn't affect the final outcome of your amount that we give you, but it does give you something to help you through. In terms of timeliness, I don't know what to say.
That's a tough one. Each individual.
Because you got to realize when we're doing the compensation, sorry to interrupt you, but we need help from the producer to determine the value of those animals, right? Not every animal on every farm is the same, right? Some guys have hybrid reproductive herds. They're purebred. They sell for this many dollars. Other guys are just selling feeder calves into the feedlot system. So we need information from producers. I need to know the value of animals you've purchased. I need to know what you've gotten from selling animals. And the more information you can give me, the easier it is for us to put the compensation package together. But we really need producer cooperation. We need records from producers. And so there's an exchange there that has to happen.
I think one thing that we really have to take note, and I'm sending this to CFIA, is these cattle were not for sale. They were never hitting the market. Calves, yes, they were, but the cow herd was not. So to determine a value of those cows is very difficult. And I guess I'm looking at it, and I know the answer to this question, but CFIA does not value the income lost over the next 5 or 7 years to the producers that are affected. And we are in unprecedented times right now, and I have to justify to my producers why we killed their cow herd and how they don't get to participate in the next, because you don't build a 1,000 cow herd overnight, correct? So that really needs to be the message that you guys send right to the very top, because these producers that are in this room could be affected, and they could lose out on the best times we've seen in this industry. I've got one more over here, and then I'll come to you, Rod.
So when you're talking about compensation, like, okay, I'm a closed herd. We've bought very few animals over the years. I've got a 30 years behind me getting those genetics, and you're saying I'm a commercial guy and I sell my cows, my steers for $3,000, for example, and I'm only there for that little bit of compensation on the steers. We're not there for the compensation of the 30 years of genetics that I've built up. The purebred guys get their compensation at $10,000 because they sold a bull for $10,000, and if they got their genetics from down in the States or someplace else and they paid $50,000 for a cow, you guys are going to take that into account. Where us as commercial guys, we're just handed, this is what you get, like it or not, and
all I can say is I have a maximum that I can do for commercial and a maximum I can do for registered. I'm not allowed to pay for lost income. I'm not allowed to pay for these other things. And that is the restrictions that I have to work with. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I'll just share that the message is...
This is my boss.
Can you hear me?
So
okay,
she's
usually
the
I'm
woman I
yelling
would
loud
tell
enough,
anyway.
but the message is absolutely loud and clear. We're not the ones that, I think what Allison's trying to say is we're just the operational folks on the ground, right? So we are bound by the regulations. There's different parts of the federal government that deal with regulatory affairs and all of those types of analysts that deal with all of this piece. And your industry is clearly well aware and well spoken, and it is their role to help lobby the government when they want those changes to be made. We have certainly shared that message through our own channels, unfortunately right now, again, we are also caretaker convention in the middle of an election. I know it's finished, but from a federal perspective, we're still in that space, so we really can't get into details about that right now.
Okay, last question.
Okay, thanks. Who has final say in the compensation? Like, is it one person, or is there a group of 3, or is there a producer involved, or how does that work?
We have a compensation team, and they'll determine your compensation, and they'll want your participation to help figure out the value of your herd. There is an appeal process that can be used if you're unhappy with your compensation.
And who would be on that compensation team? Is there a producer on that team?
Well, that goes to the court, doesn't it? Tribunal? I don't know.
For the appeal, yes.
Yeah, I think that goes to a court for a decision.
But not on the original...
He's talking about if the team approach or sole evaluator, those options.
Yeah, so there's 2 kind of ways to go about determining compensation. One of them is a sole evaluator. So one person is going to decide, or there's a team approach where there can be a team involved. And you as a producer can help us determine what approach you might prefer.
So for example, your cow herd is affected, okay? You're gonna phone somebody that you deal with, whether it's, Clayton at Heartland or the feedlot that you send your calves to, or somebody, you're gonna find 3 people to value those cows. So a third party to value those cows to send into CFIA to look after, correct?
So would I have that choice? Or to pick who I want, like if I pick Levi and Dwayne and somebody else to, would that
Yeah.
Or does the government?
No, I'm not. If you want to bring in people, you can help us choose who that would be. Yeah. Are you cutting me off? Thank you.
We're pretty much done, yeah. I guess, you know, like, as Dwayne makes his way up there, we're very, very aware with SCA that the compensation schedule is not accurate, and it's not up to date, and that's something that I'm very, very much aware of and trying to change that, and it's very difficult, especially with the election that happened and that, you know, that's going on, and I'm not gonna lie, Mom and Dad can attest to the meetings that I've been a part of to try to help these producers change this, and I won't quit, because it's, you know, you're my people, so CFI will be hearing a lot more from me. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Allison. And the reason Levi is carrying 2 mics around and that we've got here is so that you know, the little square one is so the people online can hear us as well. So if you could just bear with us with the mic, that would be greatly appreciated. Our next presentation is our Chief Saskatchewan Vet Officer, Stephanie Smith.
Try and regain my voice for this, just dealing with getting over illness. Sorry, folks, can you hear me okay if I speak like that? Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Marianne. So yes, Stephanie Smith, I'm the Chief Veterinary Officer for the province. I work with the Ministry of Agriculture. Prior to my time with government, I worked in mixed animal practice, and as well I am a producer. My husband and I have a cow-calf operation and a grain farm as well. So before I put my vet hat on, I'll just say from a producer perspective, thank you very much for the comments that are being shared. Thanks to our herds that are involved that are speaking up, because I do understand the challenges here. And I really do think about this not only from the government perspective as a veterinarian, but also as a producer. And I think I'll hopefully reiterate some of the pieces here on what we've been seeing as well, and where we'd like to try to advocate for some support in the future. So I'll talk a little bit about our role. As Allison's been talking about, CFIA does manage the response from the federal perspective. However, obviously there are challenges, there are issues, people need to hear what's going on. So both myself and SCA have been involved along with other industry associations. We've been spending time chatting with producers and really appreciate again that folks have been willing to share your stories, get in touch with us personally when you've been going through this so we can understand what's been happening. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges and difficulties with this, as you've heard from Allison. This is a very difficult bacteria. We don't always know it's there. It is very, present in very, very tiny levels in this country, as far as we know. As far as we know, it's almost not here at all. We just barely see those outbreaks. However, guess what? We just had 2 outbreaks in a row. So clearly people start to get excited and concerned, and it is impacting people in a big way. And it is difficult to wrap our minds around how this is supposed to go when things are so case by case and not everything is straightforward. I can tell you from personal perspective going through this has been a huge learning curve for me because all of this has been new to me as well. So I've been learning right alongside yourselves and tried to understand, why are we doing this? Why is this important? And why do we have to continue on this way to make sure that at that higher level we can continue to mitigate trade? But what's also very clear is we need to figure some stuff out here, because I don't think it's fair at all that then individual producers have to bear the brunt for the rest of us, right? So the things that we've been hearing back in 23 and are continuing on currently, obviously, as we've already heard today, is the lack of clarity around what does the policy look like. It's different at different times, and there are reasons for that. Some of those we've heard today, and I do appreciate that CFI has spoken a bit about that today, that they have been trying to, wherever it's possible, work in that gray area, do what is going to be at hopefully the least impactful way for that producer as possible. That's the reality of why they're trying not to put everything in black and white. However, that does mean that it leads to a lot of confusion. So I'll talk about that in the next slides here, about how we're trying to help support that. For that financial piece, yeah, loud and clear. There are a ton of costs associated with this. It costs, impacts, a lot of pieces that producers have to bear. Compensation does not cover those things. So I'll talk about where we can come in there. But yeah, as we've heard today, C&D, that's not getting covered because of the regulations, the labor, the feed, the value of the animals, that loss of production. All those pieces are outside of what the regulations currently cover. And clearly, this is a huge impact, not only physically, financially, but mentally on individuals that have to see animals being lost, or potentially your entire operation. And of course, it doesn't help then, of course, we've heard some of the rumor mills start up, of course, of being that in fear of very fearful about TB and maybe people being isolated. And I hope we can, share some information today that helps to deal with that, because certainly I don't want to see anybody isolated in these outbreaks. We need each other to band together, right? And support everybody through this. What we heard particularly in 23 was lack of advocacy, support, or seeing that empathy. Who could we talk to? If we're going through this, we feel very alone. We're not sure who to reach out to. So that is one thing we've tried to change this time around, now that we're getting more involved from the provincial side and from industry side. And that has been through CFIA. So I don't know that Allison talked about it too much, but with them being bound by privacy legislation, we don't necessarily know. If there's individuals that are undergoing investigation, CFIA doesn't shout it from the rooftops. They're not telling us, they're not telling industry who these people are, what the contact details, anything, right? That is what is expected. They have to keep that information private. So it's only once producers identify themselves to us that we know who you are and what's happening. So because of that, obviously, it can be, again, very isolating if you don't know who to reach out to. So what we did this time around, and I believe Marianne will chat about it later as well, is we did have a letter that was put together between the provinces and industry that CFI was handing out on our behalf to producers when they undergo quarantine, and it's giving that list of information, what's currently available in terms of financial supports, and where we need your support to look at future options, as well as contact details. So I'm hoping that's getting out to the right folks, but in case there's people in the room here that may be impacted later on, just be aware that you will see that. We do want to get in touch with you and provide that support, but it does have to come from yourselves wanting us to be there and allowing us to be part of that conversation. As was mentioned today, traceability, yeah, there are a lot of gaps, right? And it makes it difficult and it prolongs the process when we can't look, when CFI can't look and find where those animals have gone. It does make things a lot longer. And as we've heard in the past, just because there's things that need to be done for policy does not necessarily mean it's always in the practical sense. And so we're aware of that as well. So I'll talk about that here. So what can we be doing? What we've been trying to do with our industry group and the province is participate more regularly in conversations with CFIA, try to understand what's happening during the outbreak, what is happening, where are the challenges, hearing from producers where the issues are, and try to help support looking at different ways. Can we do something differently? Can we help support better communication? Can we give more information on why decisions are being made? I'll talk about that next here, but education is kind of where we started. So back it's been a couple months now that things kind of got confirmed and rolled out. We wanted to make sure that people had awareness, so we've been trying to insert ourselves where possible to get information out to the right people, starting with ourselves. As I mentioned, this is kind of brand new to us to be part of this, and most of us have not been through a TB investigation in past, so it's been a big learning curve for ourselves, for province and industry. As well as getting our veterinary community up to speed as well. Clearly we have a lot of vet clinics in the area and they have producers that have questions, so working with CFI to get information out to the people that need it. Holding town halls like this, putting out some publications. We're working on getting our web page up as well to provide contact details and information. And from here, really, it's kind of up to yourselves. So please do connect with your associations or back to us if there's more we can be doing, better information to get out, and how frequently you want that. We don't want people to be in the dark as we move ahead. Participation in the investigation from the provincial and industry side right now. What that means is on a weekly basis, we're taking phone calls with CFIA where they give us some updates on how the case is progressing. And then from our side, when we've heard from producers where there's challenges, we're bringing those forward, talking them through, trying to get an understanding of why certain decisions were made as they were, where the issues have been, whether we can do things differently. And then we try to relay that back and forth. I'm not overly happy that it's the best that it could be yet. It's a heck of a lot better than where we were in 23, but that's why we're starting to talk about this industry liaison role that you'll hear a little bit more from Marianne later, but we are trying to get Marianne a little bit more engaged into the investigation itself. What I'm hoping is we can have a little bit more seamless conversation, because clearly already when you're under investigation, you got lots of different people you're talking to, and it is a very challenging time. What I don't want is to burden a bunch of folks with people you don't even know, and then you're not sure who to reach out to. But we would like to try and get that a little bit more streamlined. We had a bit of conversation after the discussion in Whitewood yesterday about how we could make that happen. And again, we'll be connecting in with producers that we're aware of to see how we can make this work a little bit more streamlined in the future. And again, the purpose of this is to try to get somebody there that understands industry, right? That understands your operation, that can be there to advocate for you, that knows what you're going through, that can help to translate, you know, what is the expectation from CFI's perspective? Why do we have to do the things we're doing? And just to have that third set of ears and eyes with you, because clearly when you're going through this, it may not be your top priority to figure out how the heck do I advocate for myself when everything is going on. I'll tell you, those of you that have been, you're doing an amazing job, and I really appreciate that you've been willing to speak up. But this is a tough time for everybody, right? So if we can try and get somebody a little bit more integrated, I think it would help us in the long run. This is all a work in progress, so bear with us as we go through. This is all brand new for everybody here. So again, looking for feedback as we move along. As I said, the reality of this is we're not going to fix everything. It's not going to be an easy process whatsoever, but if we can try to ease some of the burdens and deal with some of the issues, I hope that'll support in some way anyhow. Other role of the province is to connect in with Ministry of Health. We talked about, you know, the human health implications, so we do provide the connection into the physical health side as well as the mental health side too, and providing supports where appropriate. The financial piece, again, I'll reiterate what was already said. We've heard very loud and clear. The financial compensation is not sufficient, right? And again, it is coming to the point where used to be everybody had the test and call. There was a lot of burden shared across. Now it's not. Now we have only the few outbreaks, a few producers in the long run impacted, but guess what? They bear a very significant burden going through this on behalf of the entire industry and on our entire country. So that is something I'd like to look at. I'm not the politician, so I don't get to tell you what's happening, what's not, but I can tell you what is my role is to make sure I get the information into the hands of decision makers to understand what has the impact been here, what is the issue. And from my perspective, from the disease side, I mean, I heard it loud and clear last night too from folks. How do we expect people to be compliant when it's such a financial hardship, right? If I want to have appropriate disease control, I need to make sure it's incentivizing for people to want to do that in the first place. And again, I appreciate how much folks have done, because this is on behalf of all of us, of industry, of keeping those trade markets open, right? So I've heard that very loud and clear. So thank you for those that have identified themselves to me. What that means is I need to understand, what does it cost you? What are the kind of the groups of costs that you're affecting? What are those real costs? Keep your receipts and get that information to myself or to Marianne with SCA or to whichever association you work with, and they'll help us get that information so I can roll that up as a package and put that forward. And I think we'll hear some other conversations about that later on. And then long-term change. So you guys have already hit on some of the challenges here. It was really the research, the diagnostics, right? The diagnostic tools we have, they're not perfect. And the reality is what we have is the best we have right now for live animal testing. Is that what we should just say, hey, we're good enough, let's just live with that? No, I'm not okay with that. The reality is, again, this bacteria is a tough one. It's similar to Yoni's, right? We're not going to have the perfect Yoni's test. We still don't have it. I don't know that we're going to get there on TB, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. So the longer term options for me here are, we do need to look at research, right? How can we do this better in the future so that this isn't such an onerous impact on yourselves? Where can we get involved? How can we support lab capacity? How can we support the whole process of getting those animals to enhance postmortem? Those are things I can't fix for you today, and I don't want to slow the process down. It's already long enough, but we are keeping track of these issues for the future, and Marianne will be chatting about that too, but these things are not going to be lost. We need to look at what we can do better for the future. So turning that over to yourselves, then what can you do? I really appreciate how many of you are in the room here today and online as well, because I think the key piece here is really understanding the realities of the situation. There's always going to be, theories and things and rumors that go around, but I appreciate you coming here to hear what is the reality, why are we doing this, why is it important, but also being willing to speak up and say, hey, what about X, Y, and Z? These things aren't working for us. How do we deal with them, right? So getting that information out, passing that along to your neighbors, reaching out if you need additional information. We want to be here to provide that to you. As you heard already, the folks that are getting this, I mean, it's not your fault, right? There's nothing that you did here. If I can't tell you what the source of the disease is, I can't tell you how you brought it onto your farm or did it. I don't know where it came from. So I don't want people to feel at fault that somehow this is your problem, that it came in. It is what it is. Now we got to do what we got to do. Good biosecurity never hurts. Doing your best to keep everything out is going to work for TB too, as it does for other bacteria. But I can't tell you where the source is. That I know that causes some challenges. Reaching out, again, really important. If you're comfortable, please do identify yourselves to either ourselves, your industry association, whoever you feel comfortable talking to, because the more we can hear from you about what you're facing when you go through this, the better we can advocate and look for opportunities in the future. And also looking for ways to do things differently. As you heard from Allison, the reason everything is not straightforward, black and white, is because as much as possible, they do want to try and work with folks. So if there's different ways to do things or arrange, so long as they're getting their objectives met, that we can do what we need to do to keep that trade market open, then they'll be able to listen to that. That is part of the reason we want to have this industry liaison role, part of why we want to make sure producers are connecting to each other to talk, hey, what worked for you? How did you handle this? And maybe think about some new ideas, because oftentimes it's tough when you're, again, in that moment. You don't always think about all the things that could be done differently, or maybe you're not sure how to ask. So, power in chatting together and finding better ways to do things, right? What do you expect? You already heard quite a bit of that from Allison today, but really the biggest challenge we've been seeing so far is that records piece, right? So if you can be ready, prepare those records that we try to keep things moving as smoothly as possible, try to reduce any delays. Again, requesting participation, so I'll come back again to the fact that privacy legislation being what it is, I don't get to know who you are, Marianne doesn't get to know who you are unless you're there and to give us that information, and you do need to give written permission to CFIA if you want us to be involved in any capacity, because otherwise they are going to protect your privacy, as they should, because they don't want that information going out to everybody, but we are here to help you if you would like that. And again, from other producers as well. And we had, again, good chat last night. We have people that have gone through this that are very willing to chat with others, tell you about their experience, help you to know what to expect and what the realities were for them. So again, if you're interested and you want that information, it is there. And again, I know this is a huge impact on folks, so please do reach out if you need support, either to ourselves. There are mental health resources available. I understand this is a massive, massive impact on folks. And thinking about what would happen with my own herd, my God, I can't even think about it, to be honest. So really don't feel afraid to reach out. We are here for you. We want to do our best we can to support you, because this is going to be tough. Any questions, folks?
Good presentation. How long have you been involved in this investigations? From the beginning, or when did you get involved?
We heard about it, I believe, end of November is when we got a heads up something was happening, and then it's been since February, I believe, when they started getting involved, January, February, whenever testing started, that we started doing these weekly calls and having us present.
So basically, you're the messenger to us, but how well is your message perceived to the people above you under the minister? Most ministers are very approachable. I find the bureaucrats under the ministers are the ones that are hard to work with. So how is your message being
I don't know.
portrayed?
Is Bill listening right now?
I really don't give a darn. I want to know.
I can tell you they actually have been very good. I've been really appreciative, and it is a good question, because you're right. Those are the folks that have to give the tough answers and the information to the minister. So absolutely. And everybody's changed. Like compared to 2023 investigation, Penny McCall, our ADM, is new. Bill Gruel is new as a DM. They have been very open about this. I got Bill's personal number. He's asked me to text him when things are going on. So I am updating them regularly on what's happening. Yep, and I understand that that at the minister's side, SCA is having conversations as well.
Please do so.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. They haven't fired me yet, so I should be okay.
I just have a question. I'm not sure if it's for you or for Allison, but in regards to the people that are working on compensation and the C&D, how many have experience with a cattle situation, being they're not as many as, say, for the birds or whatever?
Maybe I can touch on the C&D piece while you're at it, because honestly I don't know yet. This will be my first time going through. If we are successful in asking for agri recovery, I honestly don't know who is going to be working on that. I know from our branch we have a number of folks within policy and on our livestock branch that are involved, so yes, we have the expertise in the background, but that's also why I want your information, right? Because then I can understand and put those pieces forward. Here's what the costs are. It's not about coming up with a program out of nothing. We're the ones that have to put that forward and say, hey, here's the costs. Whether or not it gets approved, I got no clue. And I wish I had that answer for you, but I'm not the politician. But those are the kind of information that I do want. Yep. Compensation-wise?
Yeah, and then for us, compensation-wise, we do have a large number of people, obviously with the avian influenza. That outbreak has continued over the years, and it's very large. We have fewer that are more experienced in the cattle industry for sure, and similar to the province, we've had a lot of turnover in the last 10 years, right? So if you compare 2016 to now, it's probably Allison and I and a few others that are still kicking around, and other folks are newer. So it is less, but we do have a fairly good population of folks very experienced with compensation.
Thanks, Jackie.
When a producer is brought into an investigation, is there an info packet that is presented to them to help them navigate? Because in our operation, our background operation, had the good fortune of being involved in the 22-23 investigation, and there wasn't anything. We were just kind of flying blind.
Yep.
So.
Yep, no, great question. Thank you. I'll let Allison or Christine talk about what they may give. From our side, what was put together is essentially a booklet, which I actually think we have here somewhere. Maybe Leon's got some here. What producers need to know. So what we did with between industry, province, and CFIA is tried to put together that general timeline, expectations, what's going to happen, what maybe you be asked for. So I do want people to take a look. Hopefully, if there's enough here, take some with you and feel free to give a read. That's gone out to our current producers impacted. Hopefully, all of you have gotten a copy of that. So that has gone out. There was a second piece as well, as I referred to earlier. It was a letter between the province and industry to spell out, here's existing things for compensation, here's what we need from you so that we can look at other future options compensation-wise, but then also the contact points for information. So those two things have gone out. And then I'm not sure, Christine, is there anything that you guys, or Allison, sorry?
Yeah, so for the 2023 investigation, it was much smaller, but we do recognize there's ways we could improve. And that's one thing that was brought forward to us for this investigation. So both on our side and the industry side, we have a package we can give you what to expect. And it give you a lot of information. And we will assign you a case officer, as we did in the past investigation. But as Stephanie mentioned, we're trying to get a kind of a liaison case officer on the industry side as well. We're trying to do as many things as we can think of anyway and put together as fast as we can, but to help guys just to increase the amount of communication so you can be aware of what's going to happen and what to expect.
And just before you go to next question, so I'll just say, please do give it a read. For those that have been through it particularly, I would like your feedback to know, is it helpful or not? The challenge is trying to put enough in there to make it useful, but not try and paint CFI in corners, because as they mentioned, not everything is black and white. So I'm hoping it's specific enough without, painting into those corners, but definitely give us some feedback on that. If there's more we should put in, I really appreciate knowing that.
Is there research being done to, going forward, to make this easier on producers, whether it be on the vet side of things or anywhere along the whole trail of this? Is there trying to be improvements made?
Do you know what CFIA is?
There is to be.
Is there anything through NCFAD right now? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
So our goal after the end of these meetings is to put together a working group and develop exactly that. And at the start of an infection, get everybody around the same table, the producers, the vets, CFIA, so that everybody's hearing the same story. And I think that's the critical point in this, that everybody's on the same page. When things change, everybody knows what's going on, and that's what we're really going to aim for at the end of this.
I think one of the conversations that we've had at our board table is, we allocate a certain amount of dollars to research, and what that looks like varies from year to year, and some of these projects end up being 3, 4, 5 year projects, and it's great to have new varieties of alfalfa, and it's great to have different breeding genetics, but when it came down to TB and this issue, I just looked at my board and I said, you guys, I says, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day of how efficient that alfalfa crop is, or that feeder heifer is doing, in southern Alberta or wherever, if we don't have a herd to look after. So some of the testing is archaic, I'll be honest, so let's, maybe work at that. And if we have to throw some money in to maintain and, this industry, that's what we're going to do. So we're having those conversations, and we'll be sitting down with CFIA to see how we could work out something, when it comes down to testing, and just, yeah, I guess that's the conversation. I got one before we, okay, here we go.
Then we're going to take a break.
Sorry, not a question, but a response to that research part. Hi, I'm Tyra Dixon, and I'm an animal health and welfare veterinarian with the province. So there is a lot of research ongoing on bovine TB worldwide. This isn't just a problem in Canada. It's a problem definitely in the undeveloped world, but also in the developing world. So Europe, USA, a lot of research going on, a lot of frustrations around testing, and there is research. Humans, they have trouble diagnosing TB in humans, same problems, and that's a huge concern. We don't see it much, as was explained by Allison, but there is a lot of testing. There is a lot of research on testing and all of that, so it's ongoing, but it's needed.
Just a question on the research and stuff. You mentioned testing, and that's kind of a reactive thing in my mind. I'm just wondering in the research if there's any looking at developing of a vaccine or even, you talked about treatment for people and humans and how, there's been some resistance created and stuff in time, but the antibiotics have improved. Is there any sort of treatment for cattle in that regard as well?
I don't have an answer for it unless CFIA knows. Yeah.
Definitely not an expert on this, but I mean, there's a TB vaccine for humans. There's nothing for cattle yet, but I mean, that is something and it depends in what area you're in, and if you're higher risk, then potentially the vaccine can be helpful in the human world. But like as Allison had mentioned earlier, with the antibiotic resistance, that's a huge problem, especially for TB and especially with really high prevalence rates in some human populations. So I would suspect that it is being looked at. I've seen at least one report that there's research undergoing for cattle, because it's well known that it's a cattle problem, but there's nothing, no reports that I've seen at all on vaccines in cattle. So the idea is there, but again, time and money is needed to be put into that.
Is it a fair statement, Steph, to say that when it comes down to the pharmaceutical industry, they go after the big guns first, and traditionally we haven't seen huge numbers of TB and outbreaks in the last 50 years? Why are we investing a pile of money into something that we're going to make dollars on when we could be making billions on others? And I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying that that's the way the pharmaceutical industry works. Maybe we have to put a little bit more pressure onto somebody like that. There was a question in the back.
And it depends what results you're going to get, right? Because I think that's the piece that it comes down to, right? If we see an outbreak every 10 years, are we going to put $20 billion into one study? And that may not help us. I don't know. The other challenge we run into with vaccines for foreign animal diseases is how effective is that vaccine? Does it actually mask infection? Because that's going to also be an issue for us for trade. But I think it's all fair questions to know and to ask out of this is, what is our current status? What could help us better in the future? Because I do agree that we want to be proactive versus reactive.
Well, and Allison had stated, we look at different strains. Does that vaccine cover every strain, or how does that work too?
It becomes very complicated.
It's above my pay grade.
Just get a sense how serious of a problem you think it is. In our 4-H group, there's families concerned about the upcoming show in July. Should we proceed with steers only, or cancel it altogether? How worried are you?
Guess that depends what CFIA tells me. How many trace out herds are we going to have yet, Allison? I mean, my response to that right now is I don't have enough information to tell you, to be honest, because I don't know how many herds are going to be impacted. This was not a question last time because it was a small outbreak, so it really wasn't a big concern.
Yeah, and we're just at the starting point of finding all our trace outs too. I don't know who they all are yet. Putting some calves together at a show for a short period of time, is that really high risk? I mean, I don't think so, but all I can tell you is to proceed with caution, I guess. Some of you might find out you're implicated and you've been at the show and will know about that. Could that implicate other people? It's the same thing we find guys that have been at community pasture and all the other places cattle congregate, right? There's so many places you guys mix animals together, and that it becomes a factor in many different ways when we start tracing animals and finding people that are involved. So it's another place that's possible, that we might have to involve more people in the investigation, but I'm not able to identify everybody yet.
Yep.
Right? It takes us time to find them all.
But how about we have a chat afterwards? Because I wouldn't mind to know. Yeah, let's talk about dates and times. I'm coming from the point of I want to make sure I can give you concrete info, right? I don't want to brush it off. I think it's fair to be concerned. Am I so concerned that I want to shut down every show? No, because the reality is, if everyone's been commingling animals and going to shows for years, you probably were already at risk. So is the risk different this year than last year? I don't think so. But certainly let's have a chat afterwards and we'll get more information. Okay.
In the province of Saskatchewan, we have some opportunities, and this is a CFIA question. You know, there is the potential for testing to get very large. Do we have the adequate resources in Canada with CFIA to do the testing that we need? Or can we partner with groups like PDS or VIDO? I know PDS maybe doesn't have the capability to do all the testing that you need, but I think VIDO does. Is that something CFIA will consider moving forward, having an in-house in Saskatchewan testing facility?
The answer is yes, that's things we're looking at. We're looking at different resources available for partnering with different groups for different things along the way, like testing, whatever it is. In terms of lab, that's a discussion that's being had with our lab right now to figure out what is their maximum capacity, what do we think we might need this fall, and where we might be able to find ways to help us out. And so certainly there's places that could do things like histopathology and stuff like that. So definitely something we're discussing right now because we do expect a large impact this fall, so we want to be prepared for it.
So everybody's concerned, and I see a lot of question marks above everybody's heads. What do the numbers look like when we have our initial herd with positive cases? In the last 10 years, from what I understand, that there hasn't, and I haven't heard of a positive case being in a trace in or trace out herd. It's always been the initial herd. Is that correct?
Yeah, so for 2023, that was the case. And wasn't as involved in 2018 or 16. I don't want to say too much, but the difference would have been something like Riding Mountain, where we did have transmission between herds courtesy of the elk population. So there's a septic factor involved in the transmission of the disease there and why we had multiple herds. TB isn't actually a disease that is easily transmissible. And so you have to work at it. And that's why I talked about things like winter feeding troughs. That's the place where transmission really commonly happens because you have a lot of snotty nose hanging over that feeding trough in close proximity for extended periods of time, right? So we see less transmission in places like pasture and stuff like that. So anyways, I forgot where I was going with the question. Sorry about that. Yeah, anyways, I'm going to leave it there.
I'll take one more question.
There was a snotty feeding trough issue. Is there any research done of the percentage of infected animals in the wildlife and in the domestic animals?
That leads us into
because that's
we're going to have a break and then Iga's getting into that because there's been a couple.
She'll be on the hot seat
Ask
next.
the hard questions.
Okay, so we've got a couple more presentations yet, and I hate to stem the questions, but we're about getting close to an hour over our timelines. So if you want to grab a coffee and a water or a cookie, help yourself. But let's sit back down in 10 minutes and finish up because I know everybody wants to get home.
I think it's going good.
Yeah.
Not as intense. Intense.
Trying to stay out of trouble. Never working. No. No. Quite a drive. Quite a drive here for you. For me? Yeah. It's good to come to town anyway. You know Jody Horvath? Yep. Can I get you to take something to her? Or you guys speaking terms, or you and her still together?
They live like a whole mile from us, a mile and a half.
Yeah, let's talk after it's over. I'll see if my student got out there.
All right, well, we'll get on with our agenda. Our next agenda item is an environment presentation by our speaker from the ministry, Iga Stasiak.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, I'm Iga Stasiak. I'm a wildlife health specialist with the Ministry of Environment. I'm also a veterinarian. I apologize. I'm battling a bit of a cold and I'm under the weather today, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. I'll try to keep my distance, try not to get anybody sick. So I heard there's been a lot of questions already about the situation in wildlife, so I'm glad Mary Ann invited me here today. To kind of share some information. There's been some misinformation going around as well. So we just want to clarify what's been going on with respect to wildlife and the surveillance that we've been doing. So I'm going to speak to that a little bit today. Okay. So in terms of the species that we have here in the province that are susceptible to bovine TB, a variety of wildlife species could potentially be susceptible. So any warm-blooded animals could contract bovine TB. However, there are certain groups that are more susceptible and more likely to become reservoirs, meaning that the disease is more likely to persist in these populations. And those include members of the deer family, so the cervid family. So we've got mule deer, which range mostly found in the western parts of the province, but are found in the grassland and parkland regions. We've got white-tailed deer, which also range throughout the province and into the southern boreal forest. We've got our elk, which, as you know, are dispersed also across the farmland, although they're more common in the boreal transition zone. And then we also have moose, which historically have been found in the boreal forest, but in recent decades we've found more moose in the farmland as well. So any of these species are susceptible to bovine TB. They can develop very similar lesions to what we see in cattle, similar type of progression of disease, typically respiratory symptoms, but in a lot of cases they can be asymptomatic, just like cattle. Some cases the infection is latent, so it kind of stays dormant in the body. So they don't necessarily develop clinical signs of disease until maybe periods of stress, and then that can happen. So these are the species that we're concerned about as far as, these are the potential species that could contract bovine TB. There's also wild boar, which were introduced to the province in the 80s and 90s for the game farming industry. We've since had some escapes and they've become an invasive species here in the province. They're fairly localized, so we don't have wild boar in the areas where we've had the bovine TB detections in cattle, or not very many. And as Allison mentioned, other species like scavengers, like coyotes, foxes, they tend to be dead-end hosts. So they can become infected, but usually they don't tend to transmit the infection, and disease won't become established in these species or populations. So globally, bovine TB has been found in wildlife in some parts of the world, and it's become established in a variety of species that refer to as these reservoirs. So what's happened is in parts of the world, bovine TB, where bovine TB has been present in cattle for quite a long time, it's spilled over into wildlife populations and essentially persisted in these populations. So it became established, the animals started transmitting it amongst each other. And when this happens, it becomes a real serious issue as far as control in the cattle industry. So for instance, we've got European badgers in UK and Ireland that are a reservoir, brush-tailed possums in New Zealand. In Spain, it's present in wild pigs. Allison mentioned in Michigan, so in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, they have a few counties where it's been established now in the white-tailed deer populations. And here in Canada, so in the Northwest Territories in Alberta, so in the area around Wood Buffalo National Park, bovine tuberculosis is present in wood bison. It's believed to have come over with plains bison that were introduced to Wood Buffalo National Park in the 1920s, and at the time there was bovine TB in the cattle industry in Alberta. So that's how we believe it became introduced, and it's been a real challenge in trying to deal with this issue in the NWT. I just had to look it up, so I couldn't mention it earlier, but there was a question about vaccination. So currently Parks Canada and University of Saskatchewan are working on a bovine TB vaccine for bison, and they just published a paper in January, and they found that it was actually their vaccine was actually effective in controlling the degree of lesions, so that the animals developed fewer lesions when they were vaccinated than unvaccinated. So the research is ongoing, but there's been some good starts there. So, and then Riding Mountain National Park. So in the 1970s, there were infected cattle herds in Manitoba. In the 1990s, they found it in the elk population in and around Riding Mountain National Park. Later, a decade later, so in the early 2000s, it was found in the white-tailed deer. And it took 25 years to eradicate it from the wildlife populations there. So it was a monumental effort. The white-tailed deer were seen as more of a spillover host, meaning that they were continuously being infected from infected cattle, whereas the elk were an established reservoir. So yeah, that eradication program was successful, but we certainly don't want that situation, a repeat of that situation. It was, a great deal of effort and resources to eliminate it. So there were reasons. Oh, yeah.
I'm coming.
Yeah.
Oh, he's here. In regards to the eradication on that,
Yeah.
how do you know that they're still eradicated? Like, do you you're not obviously testing all these wild elk all the time. Like, are you just like, how do you know that hasn't come back?
Yeah, so maybe Allison can speak to this because she was more closely involved with the effort, but I believe the testing is ongoing. So there was enhanced testing and density reduction in the elk populations during this 25-year period, right? So during this eradication program. And so the last case was in 2014, and since then they have continued testing the elk and are not finding any infected animals. So that's providing that assurance, and they've got, we'll talk about sample size targets. So they need to test a certain number of animals over a specific period to determine that the population is disease-free, and they've been able to do that over multiple years.
So they test a live animal?
No, these would be all, so in wildlife, we do post-mortem testing. So there's no validated live animal test for wildlife, like you do the caudal fold test in cattle. So there's really no validated tests. So yeah, it's all hunter harvested animals.
But they do on the farms, the elk farms, I believe they do test them.
I think they do on the elk, yes. I think the elk are the only exception for wildlife. Yes, in some circumstances they have done the caudal fold test in elk. Do you want to speak to that? Yeah.
They do blood tests.
I think, but they're not.
Yeah, so for the farm cervid, we do test every herd every 5 years, and we test for tuberculosis and brucellosis, actually. And so we know the status of the farmed animals. So it's really the wildlife animals that become a question of surveillance when we have an infected premises, because those are the ones that we don't test every 5 years, obviously, right? So there is work done on the farmed cervids, so we do have that data, and we know that they are free. We can say that.
So it would only be if a hunter shot one that happened to have it that we know that it wasn't eradicated.
If he sent in for sampling.
Yeah, but that's why we have those sample size targets. So say we need 350 to determine the population's disease-free, so we try to achieve those targets. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think I'll move on to the next. Yeah, sorry.
So you may not know the answer, but when we had this issue in Riding Mountain National Park with elk,
yeah.
Do you know if the elk populations were high, moderate?
I can't really speak to it. I think they were moderate, and I know that there was active population density reduction because bovine TB is a density-dependent disease. Did you want to speak to that, Allison?
When it comes to Riding Mountain, what we found was multiple cattle farms are infected in one area, and because we have an infected premise, we do what we do on every. We start to look at the wildlife, and we found it was established in that population. So, the province of if the population was really high at the time, I don't know, but the province of Manitoba did a lot of work. They recognized that they don't want this. The other component of Riding Mountain is there's a lot of farms really close to a national park. Right, so there's a lot of proximity there between the wildlife and the producers. So the province of Manitoba did a lot of work to cull the wildlife in that area, and they were able to eliminate the disease over time. I don't know.
I asked the question of, you know, what were the levels of eradication in that elk herd, and I guess the point that I'm going to make is, everybody in this room is held to a certain standard for trade. And my belief is the wildlife herd should be held at the exact same standard. And so if I show up to your place and we have to depopulate your entire operation, environment, we should be looking at the surrounding herds of wildlife as well.
Well, that's what we're going to be speaking to today. So if you just give me an opportunity, we're going to talk about the level of surveillance that we have in our wildlife populations, because that's what we're doing.
So if it's related to the density of a population, I mean, the government should have a strategy to keep the population at a certain level. Not to let them get out of control. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but
no, and I think we're getting a little ahead of ourselves because there's been a lot of misinformation. And so yes, if bovine TB were established and we determined it was present in the wildlife population, then there would have to be some concrete management efforts to reduce the densities, because that is one of the management tools. And that's what was done in Manitoba. The other piece of this is the source of transmission, right? So the potential for transmission is typically around feed sources. So it doesn't persist readily in the general environment. It can persist longer in cooler temperatures, but typically the opportunity for wildlife to become infected would be over shared feed sources with cattle. So these are areas where there's, as Allison mentioned, a lot of animals that are spending time, they're coughing, there's bodily secretions, infectious material that's in the feed. And so this is another area of concern. So in Manitoba, when they worked on the eradication program, one piece was density reduction, but the other was working on trying to eliminate shared feed sources. And so there was a lot of effort around fencing, for instance, fencing around feed yards to try to minimize that contact. And so really prevention was a really important piece to that. Yeah.
I know you're the only messenger, but excuse me. So you're saying that shared feed sources, well, most, like the hay, the grain, or the silage, the cows don't go to it. The elk or the mule deer, what we have high populations of, will go there, so they're contaminating the feed. Is that what you're saying? Or you're saying the cows, our TB cows are contaminating the water through?
So we'll speak to this, but so far we have no indication that bovine TB is present in our wildlife populations. And because of these recent detections that we had in 23 and 24, we are concerned about the potential of the disease to be spread from these infected cattle herds to the wildlife. Okay, and we'll talk about this. Well, let's talk about why this is the case. Okay, so, and we have to be, I think we don't want to jump to conclusions, and that's why we're meeting here today. So as a Ministry of Environment, we have a mission to manage and protect our environment for the well-being of the province and its people, and that includes everyone. So wildlife don't belong to anyone. They are part of the public trust. They're held in the public trust by the government, and as the provincial government, we have authority to conduct surveillance and manage our wildlife populations. And that includes working with industry, maintaining the resource for the public, for hunters, indigenous people, and others. So our strategy is to prevent and mitigate risks to wildlife health, and we've got a number of plans in place to do that. And that includes enhanced surveillance for emerging diseases of concern when they come up. So in response to the detection in the cattle farm in 2023, we worked with the CFIA, so we have a memorandum of understanding, and we work closely with our partners at CFIA to coordinate the surveillance effort. So we want to ensure that the disease has not spread into the wildlife populations, which I understand is a concern for producers. And so we do acknowledge that and appreciate that. So that coming from different angles, we don't want our wildlife populations to be infected. We want to provide assurances to yourselves that the populations are disease-free. And so there are certain thresholds set. So there is a standard, and that is 95% confidence that the disease, if the disease were present, it would be present at a level of 1%. And so in order to determine that, with 95% confidence the populations are disease-free, we need to test a certain number of animals to do that, so to have statistically valid test results. And we base that monitoring based on the populations in the area that are most likely to contract bovine TB. So in this case, we have higher densities, as you mentioned, of elk and white-tailed deer in this area. So both around the 23 detected farm and the 2024 detected farm, we have very few mule deer and moose in this area, so they're not our target species. We have adequate densities of white-tailed deer and elk, whereby they could become a reservoir. So disease could potentially become in these populations, particularly if there's been prolonged contact over a number of years. There's a number of risk factors. And so we need to monitor these populations. So that's what we did. So we initiated the surveillance in 2023, and this was halfway through the season, so at that time it was voluntary. And the following year, because we needed to reach these sample size targets, we made it mandatory for hunters. So that's how we monitor wildlife populations. We work with our hunters, and they're the ones harvesting the animals, and we have them submit heads of animals they've harvested for examination and testing. So we identified a sample size target of 350, which is what we need to ensure the populations are disease-free. And with a majority of those samples coming from white-tailed deer. The reason for that is because the populations of white-tailed deer in the area are about 5 times as high as the populations of elk in these target areas that we've identified. Yeah. I've got some.
The sample target was 350 heads.
Yes.
What did we achieve?
Okay, yeah, I'm going to go over that.
Okay.
So I'll show you what we've achieved. Okay, and then we do have a period of up to 3 years to collect those samples, and that's based on the plan that's been established with the CFIA. So we have a wildlife health laboratory that's just outside of Regina, and we hired technicians to conduct visual examination of the samples. So there's a few different steps to this process. So the hunters are required in these 2 zones. So this is we're still talking about the 2023 detection. So we told hunters, if you're hunting in this area, you must submit your elk and white-tailed deer for testing. We had fairly good compliance on the elk. We had poor compliance on the white-tailed deer. I'll talk about that a little bit. And so what we do is we take 4 sets of lymph nodes from the head. We cut them in 5mm sections to look for any bovine TB lesions. And that's really important. This step is really important because in the majority of cases where you have positive culture results, you will see lesions. But that's not always the case. So that's what Allison's saying. It's not always the case. In some cases, you could have positive culture results without any lesions. But in the majority of cases, you will have lesions. So we do observe for those. And the good news is we did not, and I'll talk about that, we did not find any suspicious lesions of bovine TB. And so that was conducted at our laboratory. These are the samples that were collected over the last 2 years. So this is zone 48 and zone 37. So 23-24 was a voluntary year for hunters. So this was we were kind of halfway through the season when we found out that bovine TB was present. So we had smaller sample size submitted. We had 40 white-tailed deer and 10 elk, 33 moose, and 6 mule deer. The following year was mandatory, and we collected 295 samples, and that was from 218 elk, 69 white-tailed deer, and a few mule deer and moose. And so the sample size target, our sample size target for elk was 50, was far exceeded just in the last year of surveillance. So all of the tissues were sectioned and examined, and we did not find any bovine TB lesions suggestive of a bovine TB. Now the culture results are still pending. So as Allison mentioned, that process is longer, but that did provide us some reassurances. The other piece that's really important, I think, to understand is, so one of the way to monitor, so in cattle, you have slaughter surveillance. We don't have slaughter surveillance in wildlife, but we do have hunters. So we work with the hunters, and we've issued information, pamphlets, pictures, and we've asked hunters to report any suspicious lesions to us. Now we have tens of thousands of hunters across the province harvesting elk and deer every year. And we have not had any suspicious lesions reported to us by hunters, but we do monitor for that. So if there was anything coming in and a hunter was harvesting an animal and they're noticing granulomas in the lungs or the rib cage, we would have those animals tested, right? Like we'd ask for additional tissues from those animals, and we take it very seriously, but we have not. So that is also reassuring in that we just have not seen the lesions in the wildlife populations. So the totals for the last 2 years are 384, so 228 elk and 109 white-tailed deer. So we haven't quite hit the mark for the white-tailed deer, and that's going to be our objective for next year, because we need to have 200 white-tailed deer to get that 95% confidence that the population is disease-free. Okay? And so this were all the samples that were collected from around these two zones. Yeah, I'll take a question. Sure.
Sorry. I'll do this and then I'll hand you guys the mic.
Yeah.
You're talking about a 95% confidence of disease-free, but when we talk about that, it's always disease-free at a certain prevalence. What prevalence are you looking for in the wildlife population? Because 50 samples seems incredibly low.
Yeah, and the reason that we decided to combine, so we combined like we have 350 total, and we combined the white-tailed deer and elk. So that was done in consultation with our biologists, because was determined that it's just as likely that white-tailed deer would be sharing feed sources with cattle as elk. Now I understand some of your areas maybe you had, in some of your farms you had more elk complaints or elk congregating around your feed yards. But overall, across the region, it's just as likely that white-tailed deer and elk are congregating. And so then we based it on the proportion of animals in the population. So we have more white-tailed deer than elk in the population. But to your point, we've actually exceeded the sample size. So even though our desired sample size was 50, we've far exceeded that. We had 228 elk tested. So
I appreciate that, but that wasn't my question.
Okay.
My question was, when we do disease demonstration in the back, demonstration of disease-free, there's two pieces to that. There's the level of confidence, which you've said is 95%. Yes. Confidence at a certain prevalence. What prevalence are you saying?
Right.
Are you confident at a 5% prevalence, a 1% prevalence? In our cattle sector, we're down at 0.001% prevalence, and we're still not seeing it at slaughter, except in the one random case. So your argument that we're not seeing this in hunters, I'm very much struggling with what prevalence that calculation was at.
Yeah, no, I understand your question now. Yeah, so it's set at 1%. So that means the disease is present below 1%, and that's the acceptable threshold. Now, I don't know, Allison, if you want to speak to that, why it's 1% and not 0.5%. Yeah, it seems to be, that's the standard that's been set for wildlife populations.
All I can say is this data was put together by our epidemiologists, and that's their job. There's a lot of calculations that they do that they're trained to do to establish confidence levels and prevalence and so on. And so we have epidemiologists at the province and with CFIA, and they work together to put this level together. And it's a level that's considered acceptable
It's
for us to declare freedom in the wildlife population.
It's an acceptable threshold, and that's across the different diseases, so not only bovine TB.
So is it a different standard for the wildlife and the beef for the testing? Is that what I'm gathering here?
I don't know that they're comparable standards. I don't know that there is a standard to have confidence of freedom below 0.001% in the cattle industry. I'm not sure it works like that. I don't know if you can compare it. It's tricky.
I'm not sure if I'm going to do your question justice or not, but for wildlife, we're limited in how we can test them. I can't do live animal testing on them, basically, right? Because all we can do is take animals that have been hunted and submit them. That's all I can. This is all of the information that we can gather from them. We are able, and we've done this, like for Manitoba, we have been able to establish if there's an infection persistent in the herd, in the wildlife herd, through our testing, but we are limited in what tests we can do on wildlife to samples we collect after they're hunted, though. So we can't do the same type of thing as we would do on a cattle herd.
So, I have huge concern when it comes down to the testing ability that we have in our beef industry compared to the testing ability that we have in the wildlife herd. Because when we do, our Bovine test, our blood test in our beef herd, we have to have a CFIA agent ride with that blood sample to the lab and keep it within a certain temperature, correct?
That's for the Bovine.
Yeah, for the Bovine test. So you got to keep it within a certain temperature.
That's a specific requirement for that particular test, to keep it at a certain temperature until it gets to the lab.
But it's a test that we use for the beef industry. So a CFIA agent would have to ride with those blood samples, keep it within the certain parameters, no higher, no lower, till it gets to the plant or to the lab, and we're basing our results on positive or negatives based on those tests. But when it comes down to wildlife, I could have entered the draw, shot myself an elk, lopped off her head, threw her in the box of my pickup truck, and as long as it stayed pretty much frozen, I could have taken that head in the next 2 weeks. And I'm supposed to have faith that we're going to get results.
So
I have issues there. Just 1 second. Okay. Then the other thing that I have is when I'm out hunting, I'm not shooting the skinny old cow at the back. So when I go to the ministry and I state that we need to do a test, it should be, those tags should be given to, and they might not even be given next time, but we should be sampling the cows that are not the healthy lead cow at the beginning, but the 10% at the back that can't keep up, the old, the sick. That's where we're starting to see, the issues that I find, and I really believe that's where we're dropping the ball here. So, can you answer that?
Yes, I can. Yeah. So in terms of the testing, the testing that Levi was speaking to, the live animal testing, is actually a lot less sensitive than the testing we're doing in the elk. So we are extracting lymph nodes. So it's kind of like the difference between doing the live animal test on your cattle and then doing the post-mortem test. So we're doing the post-mortem. So we're actually doing culture, bacterial culture on the tissues and examining the lymph nodes, which is a lot more sensitive than those blood tests. which have been validated for cattle and in some cases have been used for cervids, but at a very low sensitivity, meaning there's a lot of false negative test results. That's why we're doing what we're doing. That's why we're extracting the tissues and we're doing the culture. So that's more sensitive, a better test than the test that Levi was speaking to. The other question, we don't have the culture results, so that is true. We're still waiting on the culture results.
Why is it taking so long?
Well, it has to do with what Allison was saying, the prioritization, one of the cattle samples because of the ongoing investigation, and the backlog in the laboratory because it takes a long time to culture. And so, yes, there are backlogs.
But some of those go back to 23, right? Like, so we're testing, we got stuff you've tested back to 23 and we don't even have the results back on the elk. But yet, right? But yet life still goes on for the elk, and yet a producer has to wait for that culture before they can move forward.
Right, but we have no indication. So we know that bovine TB was found in cattle herds in Saskatchewan. We have no indication that bovine TB is present in the elk populations. We don't want to jump to those conclusions. And I think the important piece is this fact that the two strains that have been found, 23, 24, are not related. Now, if they had been related, that would be a very different situation. Then, it would be reasonable to assume potentially there was movement of elk or deer between these two farms. But now we know, and that was what we were concerned about initially when we first found out. Second farm, they're not too far apart. Could wildlife be the reservoir? And then we received the strain typing and genotyping results, which show that they are very different strains. They are not related. So it does not point to the wildlife. There's no indication the wildlife are the source. We're still going to test them. We're still going to do our due diligence. But we just don't want to jump to that conclusion before we have any indication that disease is present. Very few. So there were just some preliminary ones that we have culture results. Yeah, the histo, and then there was a few tonsils that were prioritized for testing, but and those came back negative.
So when it comes to the extra tags being offered out by, I'm sure it's you guys.
Yes.
Are you following up on some of that kind of stuff, as there are, I guess you could say, some activists and stuff that are destroying tags and taking some of that information with them so that it's not coming back into our own information, I guess?
I don't know about destroying tags. Can you speak to that?
It's on Facebook.
So it was a very, very controversial issue of killing cow elk late in the season, heavy bred. And it was, like 175 that you guys were giving out tags for. Mm-hmm. So if you were one of the lucky enough ones to click in the first 3 minutes to receive that tag, you had the option to fill that tag or you had the option to burn that tag. And there was people that were very much burning those tags. And
yeah, so that's, okay.
Sorry. So that affects our ability to really get, it was only 175. And by the time, we burn a bunch of tags, and how many got shot,
Yeah, so I've got some of that there. So we had 36 heads that were submitted to us from testing from that hunt. The harvest success rate was really low. So we just got that data. So the hunters had to fill out a survey to tell us if they were successful, because we don't know that every hunter that went out was successful. The success rate for the hunters that harvested was very low. So less than 50% of hunters, maybe closer to 30% that actually were successful in harvesting an elk.
And it was a very tough time of year to do that, but we had to do something. So
it was. And we basically took advantage of the opportunity to collect samples for bovine TB, but I want to be very clear that this, the plans, this is Zone 39, this is around the location of the second infected cattle herd. Our plans are to collect these samples over the course of the next fall and winter hunting seasons. Those plans are still ongoing with the CFIA, so just like we did, I showed you around the 2023 detection. So this is all around the 2023 detection. We're going to do the same thing, okay? So, and most of that effort, so these are the zones we're going to be targeting next year. Most of that effort is going to be in the fall and winter. So even though we only collected 36, you know, this wasn't intended to be the major part of our surveillance program. There were concerns from landowners over elk depredation issues. Reports to SCIC, we had higher levels of reports or insurance claims. And so the ministry responded in that manner. It was more so intended to address those elk overpopulation concerns. And opportunistically, we collected some samples for bovine TB. But this effort is ongoing, and next fall and winter is when we're going to collect majority of our samples for testing.
Just to say a statement what you just said. I've been working with the Environment Department for 3 years. Right now, we're really struggling to get more tags, to get more testing. But I'm not going to shoot the messenger. I just want to give you statements. I'm boots on the ground, and in my area, there's a lot of cattle. Right. And believe it or not, there is herds of elk in that whole parkland where that are larger than most people have cow herds. So the population numbers is not, and there's different rules for the elk and the beef testing. And I don't know why the Environment Department is so hard to work with to get this under control. And I'll swear on something that I still think this transmission happened from wildlife, because in the last number of years, the herds are tripling, quadrupling. It's just unbelievable. And there's no way we got this TB from any other source. It has to be, because it was proven in the Riding Mountain area. And now basically,
yeah, I mean, first of all, the strain's not related to the strain in the Riding Mountain area. So it's not related, right? Like the strains found in the cattle, completely different. The other thing, so you made this point earlier about, you know, can we correlate the fact that there's a lot of elk and elk population densities with the fact that there were these two detections in cattle? We can't make that conclusion or correlation. If we were to find bovine TB in elk and, you know, we found it at a certain rate, then we can correlate that rate. Say, you know, we have this rate in the wild and this rate in, it's causing a higher rate in the cattle industry. We could make a correlation, but we're not there. We're just not.
But do you realize that the beef industry gives the province of Saskatchewan GDP? The elk hunting doesn't. And why are they so stuck on not investigating this elk thing? I don't think the investigations are enough. The whitetail has been hunted in an open season every year. The population is neutral. We probably have, the elk are outnumbered the whitetail by 10 times. And I'm only speaking in my area. I've talked to many, many farmers.
So first of all, like the argument that the surveillance is not enough. So we feel it is enough. We have met with epidemiologists from the CFIA. We've discussed, you know, the densities with our biologists, and we've worked with the epidemiologists to decide on the quotas. So how many we need to have tested.
Boots on the ground and see what problems we have. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think there's two separate issues. So there's the bovine TB discussion, no indication of bovine TB in our elk population, and then there's the elk congregation discussion, right? And depredation discussion, and that's, I think they're almost two separate conversations. It's easy to point fingers, but I think, and I'm not saying it's not an issue. I acknowledge it's an issue. We've been dealing with it. We actually ran a survey just recently in response to what we've been hearing from the cattle industry. So we went out, we invested money and resources, we ran an elk survey, and yes, it was very informative. There were more elk than we expected. We expected about 500, we found 1,300 elk in the area, and what do? We responded by adjusting our hunting quotas. So, you know, just...
You never covered the whole zone there. Those numbers are fictitious, because you never covered all zone 39 and all zone 37. That I know for a fact.
So there was a lot of, so you can see we covered 2,200 kilometers, and we based the survey area on consultation with a variety of different industries, including SCIC, the Ministry of Corrections, policing, and local landowners as well. We're part of that conversation. So we covered...
I was a part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you think...
And So there's a lot more to the zones that need to be flown. So that's what they saw in 20 hours of flying. My estimate is quite higher than that, and we'll be working. Dwayne and I sit on a committee that works with environment to try to increase that, because even at these numbers, we're still not going to get a handle on the elk population. It was estimated that there was 500 elk in zone 39, and we feed 350, and another operations feeds 300, so we were 100 behind, and that's where the question started with environment. We need to get a fly, and we need to get in the air and see, and this was a small portion of that zone, and so I'm thinking I know we're shy on those numbers, but I think the biggest thing that we get back to, Ega, is we're still killing healthy elk. We need to be going after the ones that aren't, the ones that are older, sick, not making the trek. Those, I think your numbers may change, and I think we have to look at it from a standpoint of what CWD did to this province and to the whitetail and mule deer population in the southwest and the western part of the province. And we can bury our heads in the sand and say there is no TB in this. But if there is, I would rather be ahead of this and get on top of it than 5 years down the road be like, oh my God, look at what we have to deal with now. I am pro-hunting. I hunt. I do not want to kill the entire population of the elk herd whatsoever. But I think they need to be held to the same standard my beef producers do. And I think when we're losing habitat at an alarming rate, I think, we see consolidation of these herds, and we're starting to see herds of 70 and 80 turn into 350. And Mother Nature is a wonderful way. She does a wonderful way of controlling population. She sets a disease into an area of overpopulation and deals with it that way. I'm concerned that if we bury our head, that something like this could be the CWD outcome in the elk population. Just my thought.
Yeah.
One more.
We don't want that to happen either. And I want this to be a constructive conversation, but we don't want that to happen, which is why we're doing the surveillance. And, that's why we've made it mandatory to test these animals. And we are sticking to these targets that we've identified. We want confidence. So we want the same thing. We don't want any risk that is, there is disease out there. And I know this, we could probably be here for a really long time, but I think, we want to work with landowners on this issue. As Levi said, there's habitat loss. There's a lot of pressures wildlife are facing right now. We have to acknowledge that. One of our missions is also conservation. It's, I don't know that, I'm sure some of you are hunters. We don't want to eliminate wildlife from the landscape. We want to work with, we want to manage wildlife and make sure that you're able to operate your businesses as well. Maybe part of a, discussion, longer term discussion that we need to have and maybe, working group to kind of address some of these issues. But I'm hoping from a bovine TB standpoint, it does provide some clarification. Yeah.
So in this area where you found 1,352 elk, what were the biologists saying? How many elk did they think were there?
Well, like we said, we thought there were about 500. Now, keeping in mind, we don't do aerial surveys everywhere, every year across the province. We have a very limited aerial survey budget. This was very beneficial, and it was spurred by the landowners. The only reason we had funding and were able to do this survey is because of the concerns you've raised. So, I guess continue along that vein if we're wanting more aerial surveys. That's the best way to get information. Otherwise, we're relying on estimates from the public, SCIC, insurance claims, but aerial surveys are by far the best way to get that information. Yeah.
Were those elk not brought by the Crown in the early 80s in 37 and 39, I thought?
Brought in?
Yeah, were they not?
Well, that was long before my time, but I believe they were naturally established populations. Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I understand about producers having to pay for elk. There's actually, SCIC has a crop damage and compensation program that's available for landowners. So if you have had damage to your property, you don't have to be pre-enrolled, and there's compensation available for damage to cropped and stacked forage. And there's preventative measures like fencing that's available that you can have free of charge. So SCIC will provide that. I don't know if Janelle wants to speak to that, but that program's been transferred to Saskatchewan Crop Insurance.
But I just want to make a quick, I'm trying to speed it up, Dwayne. I know we're running out of time. My cows don't eat $100 bills. I want the feed, and we need the feed. And if the population is getting to a level where they're impeding my ability to raise enough feed for my cattle and my operation, then we have a serious issue.
Yeah.
I'm very, very happy that crop insurance is there to look after me in this situation, but I am not farming for crop insurance.
Right. Yeah, so I just want to say that Ministry of Environment no longer manages that program. So the landowner compensation program, that is crop insurance.
Couple comments, and a question is, Iga, would your department ever consider working with a producer, set up a trap, catch whatever, 100 of them, and run them through a federal slaughter plant through a elk marketing co-op that is operating out of Alberta? You would have awesome results in sample collection. The other thing concerning your last elk hunt here, for Stanley, you had the arm of Stanley, but we all know the elk are Highway 15 north, basically. And I could have showed you more than 146 elk standing 2 miles north of Stanley between the highway and zone 39.
Yeah, and so
like, don't waste money on flying. Just set up a trap. And
they move. So these elk do migrate long distances. So this kind of addresses the trapping issue as well, which is why we are targeting such a large area for our surveillance effort here. So if you look at, the map there, we're going to cover that area. That's going to be covered in our surveillance that's going to be taking place in the fall and winter, and we're going to far exceed whatever we could catch using corral trapping. Now, we've done that. I've worked in Kentucky. It's logistically very challenging, lots of resources and manpower, and we're going to get a smaller sample size doing that than what we can get from our hunters. Yeah. So, okay, thanks everyone. Yeah, I know it's a contentious topic, but appreciate the time.
We put you under the bus, didn't we?
Well, thank you, Iga. Our next presentation is our CCA Animal Health staff person, Lee Rosengren.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much. I don't have any slides for us today, and I will be fairly brief with the time. I'm Lee Rosengren. I work for Canadian Cattle Association as their Chief Veterinary Officer. I cover animal health and welfare, and so along with Marianne and crew at Sask Cattlemen's Association and Dr. Smith at the Provincial Association here, we're certainly here working on your behalf. I want to start by just acknowledging that this is a terrible situation for the producers who were implicated in 2023, for the producers currently implicated in this one, and for those who may be involved in the future trace out. My heart goes out to you. This is a disease that you've done nothing to put yourself in this situation other than be in this wonderful industry. We recognize that, and we recognize that this creates a massive amount of pressure and stress, and so I just want to start with that little piece. And to echo what Dr. Smith said, we don't know who you are. So I hear complaints that CCA and SCA aren't doing anything to help producers, and we are here to help you. You do need to self-acknowledge. So whether it's yourself or whether it's other people involved, please make sure that message gets passed on, that a phone call or a text to one of us to let us know who you are then enables us to start advocating on your behalf. What the heck is CCA doing? Are they doing anything for us in this issue? We are. We're out there and we're advocating on 3 different topics, and I'll touch on each of them briefly. The first and the foremost is the compensation piece. It is very unfortunate that these compensation tables are so out of date relative to our very strong current market. We have been advocating strongly with the federal government, and Allison and Christine, thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate you are operational, boots on the ground. They are the people who are getting us out of this situation. But CCA does have the ears of the people who are more at that regulatory level. We have made it very clear to them what the cattle market is at currently. We have made it very clear to them that there needs to be a better process. So the pieces that we're advocating is, number 1, we need to get these values fixed very quickly. That does require regulatory change, but that's for the producers who are immediately involved right now. We also need to look at the process for setting the prices moving forward, so we don't end up in this situation again where we have quickly fluctuating markets and the tables are out of date. And then thirdly, we need to work on the compensation process for the actual individual producers who are involved and make sure that that is quick and seamless and that the money gets in people's hands quickly. This does and can put a significant challenge on cash flow for producers, and so there needs to be an ability for that compensation process to be smooth. So those are the pieces CCA is advocating on your behalf regarding compensation. I'll separate compensation from support. So compensation is the money that CFIA pays out for things and animals ordered destroyed. First of all, we're incredibly fortunate in Canada that we have that compensation. Not every country in the world has it, so we're very lucky to have it. But the other piece is what we're going to call supports. So beyond things ordered destroyed, there's a lot of financial burden put on producers who become implicated. The quarantine can be costly. You may end up having to do things with your animals that you hadn't anticipated, feeding extra animals, not accessing markets at the right time, perhaps changes to infrastructure and facilities. So we are advocating for a program to help offset and support that. It may or may not be something like agri-recovery, something like the disaster financial assistance arrangement. There's a bunch of levers that can get pulled, but we're working on that aspect. I think Marianne had mentioned and Dr. Smith had mentioned to start, if you are involved directly, to start keeping a list of what those costs are. That's very helpful for us to go in and tell the story about how this is financially affecting producers. And then the third thing we're advocating for is more on the operations level with people like Allison and Christine. We recognize that for producers that this does cause interruptions, inconvenience, and we are working with them to minimize those. Sometimes it's simply explaining how the industry operates. Sometimes it's helping facilitate communications. Sometimes it's helping just facilitate the situation. We do work on that. But we do recognize that we want to minimize the impact on the welfare of your cattle, on the operations and the logistics that you're under, and as well under your mental stress and that of your family and your business partners and the people you work with. The last thing I'm just going to mention is that we bring the human element to Ottawa. People like Dwayne Thompson, Ryan Beierbach chaired yesterday's meeting. These people come to Ottawa, we call them fly-ins, but we sit them down in MPs' offices, we explain the situation, we tell them what it's really like on the ground. We have raised this issue at the Prime Minister's office prior to the election, and we will be doing it as soon as we get our foot in the door with the new elected government. We raise this issue every single time we met with Minister McCauley, and we also had the opportunity to raise it with Cody Blois in the short time that he was the Ag Minister, and we've already got calls out to their office for more meetings again. So we're raising it at those levels. We'll be talking to the MPs in the affected ridings as well. On top of that, we have the ears of the people in CFIA that are in charge of these regulations. We have regular meetings with the people at the top of the CFIA to talk about this and to push them to move those forward. And lastly, we are here. My number's up there, my email's up there. I'm happy to talk. A handful of you'll know that I do answer my cell phone evenings, weekends, working hours too most of the time. So please reach out to us, let us know how we can help. and along with our colleagues. And with that, I'll take any questions. Good.
I'm not sure if it was you that said yesterday or somebody else, but is there, if in the case we get the payout at the top rate that we're the 4,500 or what have you, is there a back date if there is compensation further down the road that it will backdate at a higher level?
Yeah, at this point, I don't want to speak and lock anybody into anything. By the letter of the rules, it doesn't look like that would be the case, but I don't want to speak because we are certainly in conversations with the CFIA to make sure this is fair compensation for everyone who is implicated.
I think it is true, though, in past case, there has been retroactive payment. Is that correct? In 2015, 2016, I think there was retroactive.
Yeah, I won't speak on that. I'll get it wrong. If to see if I want to.
We can't speak to that today.
No.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks very much. I'll be around after the meeting.
Thank you, Lee. I can attest that we're in good hands with Lee. She takes her job to heart, and she will go to bat for us at the federal level. So, so our last presentation will be by Marianne Posberg. She does a lot of work on our research and policy end of SCA, and carries a lot of other balls as well.
Hi there. Thanks very much for being here. I appreciate that we only put out the ads, I guess, for this a couple of weeks ago. So really appreciate that we've gotten this crowd out on fairly short notice, and we've got a good number of people watching online too. As Stephanie has noted, the producers that are involved in this investigation do take the brunt of the investigation. They do take the brunt of the onus on protecting the rest of the herd. So it is really important that our organization, the SCA, do our best to try to at least coordinate as much as we can to minimize the problems that they occur, that they do have to deal with. So there's a few things that we try to get done for this investigation for the producers here. And just to kind of note, there's a question earlier about how long does it take to kind of go through this investigation. It takes a good amount of time. There's a good amount of time to kind of wait for the tests to come back, but then also organizing all of those tests as well. So within that process, it's a good idea to try to get a hold of your industry liaison. So if you don't feel comfortable with me at the Saskatchewan Cattle Association, there's also the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association, as well as the Saskatchewan Cattle Feeders Association. So you're not stuck with me if you don't like the look of me. So as far as the disease investigation goes, we do try to talk to the producers and try to put it into terms as to why these diseases matter, what exactly makes this disease, bovine tuberculosis, different from, any other disease that you would see with bovine respiratory disease, and how the bacteria moves a little bit, and try to make that a little bit simpler to understand. But that also goes into why some of the tests happen the way they do. And if I don't know the answer, I'm pretty quick to say that my background is in agricultural economics and not in veterinary medicine. So I often talk to Stephanie, or I'll talk to Allison or other folks at the CFIA to make sure that we've got the proper reasoning for this investigation. I should also say that we've handed out a few copies of, it's further down here, but the why does this, or what happens when the investigation happens. So we do try to work out ongoing problems. Allison noted before that there's not really crystal clear protocols for every single farm and ranch, because all of these ranches and farms are very, very different. Certainly, growing up near Humboldt, my farm was very, very different from, growing up in southwest Saskatchewan or southern Saskatchewan. I didn't go to a branding growing up because we'd all went through the chute. So some things like that are fairly simple differences, but there are a lot of other differences that occur on the farm. And as Allison and Christine have mentioned, there's not always people involved in the investigation who are intimately understanding the difference between a beef operation and another livestock operation. So we do try to hammer that out and bring forward some of the concerns that the producers have so that we can clear up some of the differences and the reasons why changes need to happen. And on top of that, there are some investigation decisions that aren't clearly understood. We do try to get more clarity in there. The tax deferral. So if we've got, 1,000 animals that are being depopulated, you're going to get one heck of a tax bill. So we've already put in a request to the federal government for a tax deferral over 5 years so that you don't have to pay it all at once. That is, something that's happened in previous investigations, and we are expecting it to happen in this one. Collecting information for that potential compensation. This is something already noted before as well. So we've given out an email to the producers that have contacted us already to give them some, points that they would want to look out in their herd. I know Alberta has done this as well before. This is not just based on what we're thinking of at the top of our head, but it's also based on previous investigations in which my colleague from Alberta has also worked with producers, and they've also gotten compensation on various activities on their farm. But as I've noted before, all farms are different, so we really do want to hear from the producers in their own words and in their own details what areas on their farm that they've had to increase labor or increase feed, increase costs, increase fencing, so that we can get a really clear picture of what number of or what amount of compensation we might request from the provincial and federal government. And finally, because there are problems that occur that we think perhaps can be put into the regulations or can be ironed out, not only because we want it to go forward, but we want that to be put into the regulations, but also to ensure that some of the institutional knowledge occurs as well. So this is my first investigation for bovine tuberculosis or any disease investigation with the CFIA. I think, Stephanie, you said yesterday it's yours as well. So we're definitely learning on the job here too. If the next investigation doesn't happen for another 10 years, I might not be here. Really would like to know that the person who takes over for me would have the information available to them in our documents. So we're collecting information to make sure that, as hard as it's been for this one, that it doesn't happen for the next investigation, and we can make this a lot clearer. That being said, we have done some preparation already. This animal health emergency management booklet. If you've gotten the agenda for today, you've got the QR code and the website for not only this, but other resources that we have for producers. It gives you a little bit of information, not only about this disease, but other diseases that are reportable and could be quite serious for your farm. So take a look. Even though for bovine tuberculosis, there's not very much that you could have done to prevent it because it is such a tricky bacteria, there's still other diseases that biosecurity can help out to ensure that it doesn't spread onto your farm. We do have information in that handbook, as well as the document that I've handed out as well, and that'll be put up on our website about exactly what would happen if an investigation happened on your farm. And so please take time to look that up. So where do we go from here? We're doing a lot more communication with the CFIA. Obviously, they've been coming out. They still like the look of me, so they're still talking to me, and we are having more and more communication, so we're figuring out ways that we can communicate better and smooth out more of those issues before they become a problem. That post and get investigation review that I just noted, pretty important. And we're hoping that if we can, to have kind of a intermediate investigation as well. I should also say that there's been notes taken from the 2023 investigation. So Stephanie's predecessor, Betty Althouse, was great, and she would be here too, but she's frolicking around in France right now. She very much a pre-scheduled vacation, but she has been taking notes from this previous investigation as well as this investigation so that we can have more data to work out some of the problems and work out what we can do to change it. Research, we've kind of already talked about that a little bit. I did want to note that while there is a vaccine available, the reason why we still want to have more research on a vaccine is because you wouldn't be able to tell the difference when you test that animal whether or not it's been vaccinated or whether or not it's been infected. And if we're exporting our meat, which we have to because we cannot consume it all in Canada, we need to very clearly determine that that animal has been vaccinated, it is healthy, it has never been infected. So the research continues there. But I should also note that we have a lot of projects. So we spend between $300,000 and $500,000 on research per year, given on whether or not we like the projects that are put in front of us. And some of those projects can still be useful for TB. So if we get a project that perhaps can ensure that there's a lot more sensitivity to detecting bacteria and viruses, then that could also help. And we've got a researcher that's working on that right now. And as noted, we need those clearer protocols so that it can still work within the CFIA can kind of still work within those gray areas. However, we can still have really clear questions or clear answers rather to the producers that are affected by this investigation. So I know people really don't get excited when they're talking about mental health, but I do want to point out that we have more suicides in the agriculture population per capita than any other industry in Canada. Whether or not you're affected by this investigation, anybody in the agriculture sector, anybody in farming is able to take advantage of 6 free hours of either in-person or online mental health through saskagmatters.ca. There's also a lot of other support there through the Farm Stress Line, the National Farmers Crisis Line, even texting 211 to get more information or to connect with resources, and then 988 for the Suicide Crisis Helpline. And then beyond mental health, there's a couple of brilliant regional specialists, if you want to put up your hand and wave around. There's Alexis. So they're really great at helping you out with any production questions as well. And if you're kind of wondering about that compensation piece and you're wondering, what can I do to figure out or kind of facilitate some of the questions around where can I get labor costs, that sort of thing. Where can I even test feed? They're really good at answering the questions about testing feed. And I should actually back up and say that if you're wondering as well about what we can do to kind of help out this situation. If you are involved in the investigation, there are producers who have already put up their hand to say that they are willing to connect with others who are involved in the investigation so that they can kind of be a bit of a helpline to each other. But also I should point out that in previous investigations, those producers that worked together to figure out compensation questions got a higher amount of compensation because they were able to trade ideas about what could help them on that compensation. For example, I mean, one person was able to note that through his record keeping, he regularly got 15% above and beyond the average compensation rate. Or not compensation rate, but they were able to get 15% above the market level for their cattle, so that was able to be put into the compensation levels as well. So information like that really makes it worth talking to other producers, so I would highly encourage that if you get involved in this investigation, it is worth contacting us so that we can help make those connections with other producers and they can kind of help kind of have support in numbers there. So with that, I really do appreciate that you're able to make it today. I hope you feel comfortable talking to me, and if you get involved in this investigation, please feel free to email me or get a hold of our office, and I'll be happy to talk to you. Any questions?
Marianne, when it comes down to taxable income, there's a question of what that looks like for, is that like a 3 or 5 year return plan? I know you kind of touched on it a little bit. Is there appetite to pull that right out of the feds and allow for longer terms? I mean, they didn't ask for this, and I know in the 2015-2016 case, when he was buying back into the industry, he was very, very close to being taxed at 45%, and he was running out of his deadline to do so. So then you get forced into buying cattle that maybe you don't want to, just so you don't pay tax. Maybe that's a conversation moving forward too with the powers that be. So
the standard has been 5 years in the past. Because the herd is so small right now, and it can be difficult to get for the producers that are used to being very particular about the types of animals that they buy, it is going to be difficult in the next year or so. So I know that that's been part of the conversation as to how much that tax deferral can count per year, but I can't comment into what exactly could happen.
Here's a real stat, CFIA, okay? So my producer that we depopulated, the top end that you would be able to pay them out was $4,500 on a commercial animal. They are now trying to enter the industry, and they are buying open replacement females at that exact value. That's what we're up against. And that's why it's absolutely crucial that these conversations today make it through everyone from your position to the very top. And if we can help in any way to spread that message and really hit home with that, that's the reality of today's market. So, and they don't get to participate for the next 5 years at 1,000 cows. That's the other thing. So, any other questions? All questioned out.
All right.
Well, thank you, Marianne, and thank you to all the other presenters today. I can assure you that our SCA staff are incredibly dedicated. They're a really a group of people that work well beyond the call of duty on our behalf. And Chad Ross and Levi Hull as our, thank you. You guys really carry the ball well for us, and it's really appreciated. So I guess, today as I started the day, we got a lot of information today. I hope a lot of your questions were answered. All the staff people are open to questions. The numbers are readily available, so don't hesitate to call them. One thing that we can assure you is that going forward, we're going to try to put together a resource book so that we don't have all the unanswered questions and people not knowing what's going on. And I guess what I would encourage that if there, heaven forbid, is another case, it really is the responsibility of the producer to reach out to SCA so that we can communicate with you, because SCA doesn't get contacted, and so it'll get contacted anonymously, but unless that producer comes forward with confidentiality and everything, it's really difficult. So I encourage you to let, if it happens or if you know somebody, encourage them to, there's no stigma involved because there's nothing you did to bring it on. And so we're going to put together that working group, and hopefully we can report that we have a handbook that and a step-by-step how we're going to work together with all the different people affected and in charge of what's happening, because I guess the thing that I've heard loud and clear is that there's a lot of frustration, and we can appreciate that. So we're going to try and fix that. So with that, I hope everybody has a safe and enjoyable spring, and that the rain comes when we need it, and the calves are worth a good $1 again in the fall. Have a good day. Yeah. And there's lots of cookies and stuff available there yet too, so.
Don't make us take them home.